I was sitting on my dorm bed when the notification came through. My phone buzzed with a short vibration, and the university app popped up a red circle. Registration confirmed, it said. I hadn't even finished selecting my courses yet. My heart started pounding, not out of fear, but that weird mix of irritation and confusion that always hits when something small goes wrong with admin stuff. I opened the app, scrolled through the course list, and saw 4 classes. None of them were the ones I had queued for. They had put me in financial management for entrepreneurs, modern theater and society, human geography 2, and something called the Advanced Organic Chemistry Lab. I'm a political science major. None of these belong to my program, not even remotely. I double-checked everything. My saved preferences, my degree track, even the notes I made weeks before when I spoke to my academic advisor. I had planned everything carefully. I was supposed to take international relations 2, political theory, data, and public policy, and a general elective I was actually excited about, history of political violence. It was a stacked semester, but I'd done all the prerequisites. It was all greenlit, and now it was gone. I logged in on my laptop. Maybe the mobile app was bugged, but no, it showed the same thing. My registered classes were locked. 4 of them, none of mine. I tried to drop one just to see if I could. I clicked the red drop button next to theater and hit confirm. I logged in Circlespont. Then an error message popped up. Course change failed. Please contact the registrar's office. I refreshed and tried again. This time, the entire screen froze. I closed the tab, reopened it, and logged in again. Now all 4 classes were grayed out. Uneditable. I spent the next hour navigating the university's student help page. The chatbot was useless. It gave me links to FAQ articles. None of them answer anything. I found an email contact form buried 3 levels deep, filled it out, and hit send. The next day, I got an auto reply. Thank you for contacting the registrar's office. Due to increased traffic during enrollment season, responses may take up to 5 business days. I stared at the screen. 5 days. By then, the add/drop deadline would pass. I went to the registrar's office in person. I don't usually like confrontation, and I'd hoped to solve this quietly, but things were too weird now. When I got there, the line was out the door. Everyone looked pissed off. I stood for almost 45 minutes before I made it to the front. When I reached the desk, the person there barely looked up. I handed over my ID and told her there was a problem with my schedule. She typed something in, looked at her screen, then raised her eyebrows. She turned the screen to me. "Looks fine," she said. I told her those weren't my classes. I hadn't selected them. I showed her screenshots of my original course card, which I thankfully had saved. I showed her my major on my profile. She frowned, then leaned over to a colleague at the next desk. They whispered back and forth. Then she turned to me and said, "It looks like your preferences were overridden. The system must have rebalanced seat allocations. Happens sometimes." I asked her what that meant. She didn't say much. Just that the system tries to optimize course loads based on department needs, seat fill ratios, and student availability. Some kind of algorithm. She couldn't do anything about it. If I had a complaint, I could submit a class reassessment request form, but she warned that it would probably take a few weeks to process. I went back to my dorm room, filled out the form, and submitted it. I kept getting up every hour to check for updates. Nothing changed. Days passed. I kept attending classes I didn't care about, pretending to take notes while my mind wandered. In chemistry lab, I didn't understand a single thing the instructor wrote on the board. I was partnered with some junior who was clearly annoyed I didn't know how to set up titrations. In theater, we had to submit a personal performance reflection after miming out an emotion. I felt like I was losing time. Every day, I went to the admin building, asking if my form had been reviewed. They just told me to wait. One of them finally told me that if I kept submitting the same form over and over, the system might flag it and process it faster. So I did. I submitted it 7 times in one day. The next morning, I got a message in my inbox. Request denied. Schedule matches algorithmic optimization criteria. Manual override unavailable. I stared at the message. It looked like it had been auto-generated. It didn't even mention my name. That week, I started digging. I searched the student subreddit for my university. I searched course registration problems. Most of the threads were filled with minor complaints. But then I found one titled, Who else didn't get any of the classes they chose? It had over 200 comments. People from different departments were saying the same thing. They've been registered for random courses, some of which had nothing to do with their program. Some of them had filled the complaint forms and got rejected too. Others were still waiting. One person claimed that they had been assigned to 3 senior-level math classes, even though they were an English major. They dropped out. Someone posted a screenshot of a message from a TA in the comp sci department. It mentioned something about a new scheduling system called Smartalog that the university had implemented that semester. It was supposed to improve efficiency and reduce bottlenecks in high-demand courses. Apparently, the algorithm would prioritize full classroom utilization to justify faculty funding. So if a department had underfilled electives, the algorithm would reroute students to fill the gaps. They even posted a paragraph from a leaked memo. It said, course seed optimization must maintain a 90% plus fill rate across all offered classes. Student preference is a secondary variable unless the class is mandatory for degree progression. I read that sentence over and over. I wasn't in required classes. I was in electives. All the classes I had chosen were technically electives in the eyes of the registrar. Even though they were central to my track, they weren't hard required. And the classes I'd been given, they were underfilled. The algorithm moved me just to make the numbers look better. It made sense in a sick way. If you just looked at spreadsheets, you'd think nothing was wrong. Every class was filled, no wasted resources. But to the students, it was chaos. I started tracking down other students affected by the glitch. I asked around in the dining hall, study lounges, coffee shops. Some people had similar stories, especially upperclassmen. One girl told me she had lost her final internship eligibility because the required capstone seminar got filled before she was even registered. Another guy said he had planned to graduate that semester, but he got stuck with 3 intro courses that didn't count for anything. He filed an appeal and never got a reply. He was thinking of suing. The more I listened, the more it started to feel like it wasn't even a glitch. It was deliberate. I found an older PDF in the university's online archive, minutes from a budget meeting over a year ago. It mentioned the Smartalog initiative, listing it under cost efficiency goals. A few lines caught my eye. Reduce human intervention in scheduling. Improve department retention, funding via optimized enrollment patterns. Reduce elective undersubscription. It was all about money. Departments got funding based on enrollment. Unfilled electives meant less money. So the algorithm pushed students into empty electives, even if they didn't need them, even if it ruined their plan. I sent an email to my advisor. I kept it short, just laying out the facts. She replied 2 days later with a single sentence. Please book an appointment to discuss this in person. I booked the first slot I could. When I walked into her office, she looked tired. She said the system wasn't working the way they thought it would, but she didn't have authority to override it. She told me she had submitted 5 manual change requests that week. All were rejected. She said faculty had started quietly complaining, but the administration was doubling down. They're calling it a short-term adjustment, she said, but they've already renewed the software license for 3 years. I left her office feeling numb. That week, I stopped going to the random classes. I spent most of my time researching ways to file formal academic grievances. I read the policy handbook, checked the chain of command. Everything had a dead end. Most decisions were at the discretion of the registrar. I joined a student group that was trying to raise awareness, but it barely got off the ground. People were too busy, too tired. Some didn't even notice the problem. Others thought it was just a one-time glitch. By mid-semester, I had 3 failing grades. I didn't understand the material in any of the courses. I tried, but I was in over my head. I didn't have time to learn theater theory from scratch or memorize lab safety protocols or do spatial analysis for human geography. I didn't belong there. I appealed again. This time I attached all my screenshots, my notes, my saved card, and even a signed letter from my advisor. The reply came 4 days later. Final decision upheld. No further appeals permitted. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my floor until dawn, going through everything. The way it started, the way I kept trying, the way no one could help because no one was allowed to. The scariest part wasn't the loss of time or credits. It was realizing that the system didn't care who I was. I was just a row in a spreadsheet. It started the same way everything else does on campus. A poster on the bulletin board outside the student union. Bright blue, blocky letters, a cheerful logo, and a slogan across the top. Find success through connection. Join the peer mentor program today. I was in my second semester, still trying to find my footing after a rough first term. I figured a mentor might help keep me on track. The flyer promised weekly check-ins, study sessions, and a structured plan to help students succeed. Signing up was easy. I filled out an online form, got an email 2 days later with the name of my assigned mentor and instructions to meet every Tuesday at 4 p.m. in the Learning Commons. My mentor was named Ryan. He was a senior, business major, tall, always wore those department polos with the embroidered college logo. He smiled a lot. Our first meeting was short. He asked a few basic questions, what classes I was taking, what I wanted to improve, how I studied. He wrote some stuff down in a notebook, nodded a lot. He told me we were going to build an accountability framework and that he would help me stay locked in. I felt good about it at first. I even brought my laptop and textbooks to our second meeting, ready to go over homework. But Ryan didn't want to dive into assignments. He wanted to talk about time management, motivation, how to set goals. I figured that was part of it, so I went along. We made a schedule, broke down my week into blocks. It looked good on paper, even if it felt more like busy work. But the weird thing was, I kept waiting for it to click. I kept waiting for the academic support. Week after week, we met, and it was always the same. He asked about my sleep, my mood, my energy. He took notes. He always seemed more interested in logging something than actually helping. I mentioned I was struggling in my psych class. Couldn't get through the readings, didn't get the lectures. He nodded and said that was normal at this stage, and we could circle back to it. We never did. By midterms, my grades were slipping again. I wasn't doing better, I was doing worse. I started skipping our meetings. But then I got an email from the program coordinator saying I needed to re-engage with my mentor to stay in good standing. They used phrases like mutual accountability and student commitment. It was weird. I didn't remember signing anything that said I had to keep going. So I went back. I showed up, nodded through the sessions, let Ryan jot his notes. I felt stupid sitting there while my work piled up. I didn't know how to quit without it affecting my standing in the school somehow. Then I started talking to other students. I overheard one guy in the library telling his friend how useless his mentor was. I waited until his friend left, then asked him if he was in the peer mentor program. He was. His story sounded like mine. Generic advice. No academic support. No feedback on work. Just talking about routines, energy, time blocking. More and more, I started hearing similar things. In the cafeteria, on the shuttle, outside the dorms. Everyone was being told the same vague stuff. One girl said her mentor started bringing a checklist to every meeting and asked the same questions each time, then left without even checking her assignments. A few students said they were getting emails too, reminding them to attend sessions. The school seemed really invested in keeping us in this thing. I started digging a little. First just online, looking up the program on the university website. There's a lot of language about student support, engagement, success metrics. The program was tied to something called the Office of Student Achievement and Retention. They talked about data, outcomes, persistence rates. It all sounded impressive, but there were no actual descriptions of what mentors did beyond support students. Then I went to the administrative building and asked to speak to someone in charge of the peer mentor program. They gave me a contact name, Dr. Weller, but told me she only met with students by appointment. I emailed her and never heard back. At this point, I had almost failed my psych midterm, missed a paper deadline in history, and was behind in stats. I decided to stop going to the meetings altogether. I wanted to see what would happen. A week later, I got another email, then a text. Then Ryan emailed me directly, asking if everything was okay and reminding me that my attendance was crucial to the program's reporting structure. That phrase stuck with me. Reporting structure. I copied the email into a document and started collecting more. Emails from the program. Text from mentors. I asked around and got copies from other students too. They all sounded similar. Emphasis on engagement, participation, tracking progress. Very little about actual grades or academic outcomes. It was like the whole thing was about recording that meetings happened, not whether they held. I found an old newsletter from the Office of Student Achievement and Retention Online. Buried in the second page was a line about how the peer mentor program had logged over 18,000 mentorship hours last year. They said this data helped secure renewed funding through state-level retention grants. That's when it hit me. The program wasn't about helping students. It was about collecting hours. Every meeting, every check-in, every form we filled out, it all went into some log. That log was used to prove the program was active and effective, which got them more funding. We weren't being mentored. We were being used to pad stats. It made sense then why the mentors didn't help with coursework. That wasn't the point. They were volunteers, mostly upperclassmen, trying to pad their resumes. Some of them probably thought they were helping, but none of them were trained tutors. Their real job was just to keep us showing up. I brought everything I had to the student newspaper. Screenshots, emails, copies of forms. The editor, a junior named Alexis, took it seriously. She said they'd had suspicions before, but nothing concrete. She asked me for a statement, then followed up with others I mentioned. Within a week, she had a piece ready to go. It published on a Monday morning. The headline was blunt. Peer Mentor Program prioritizes funding over student support. Say participants. It quoted several students, printed excerpts from the emails, and cited university documents showing the program's hours were tied directly to grant reports. The fallout was immediate. Students flooded the comments. Dozens said they'd had similar experiences. Faculty started asking questions. The university issued a statement saying they would review the program for compliance with its original intent and student benefit outcomes. Ryan stopped emailing me. A week later, I saw him in the dining hall, sitting alone, not in his usual polo. He looked tired. The program didn't shut down completely, but the format changed. The school announced new training requirements for mentors, and all mentoring sessions had to include documented academic support, actual help with assignments, tutoring plans, progress checks. More importantly, students could now opt out without penalty. No more emails or threats about engagement. You had to want to help, and the help had to be real. I passed psych with a C+, barely. Made up the paper in history. Got through stats with tutoring from the actual academic support center, a place I hadn't even known existed because nobody in the mentor program ever told me about it. It still makes me angry when I think about it. Not just that I wasted time, but that so many others did too. All those students thinking they were getting help, just spinning their wheels while the school cashed in. But I'm glad I figured it out. Glad I didn't just sit there while it happened. The system counted on us not paying attention. It worked until we did. It started with a single night. I remember because I had just fallen asleep. I looked at my phone when the fire alarm went off. It was 2:17 a.m. The sound was sharp, metallic, the kind of thing that goes through your skull and sits behind your eyes like a headache. At first, I thought it was a drill. Maybe a stupidly timed one, or a mistake. Everyone in my dorm shuffled out into the parking lot behind the building, some of us in pajamas, others with blankets wrapped around them. It was cold out, middle of October. We stood around like half-asleep animals until campus security came and gave the all clear. No fire, nothing. We went back in, climbed into bed, and tried to catch whatever sleep we had left before class in the morning. Then it happened again the next night. 2:41 a.m., same alarm. Same procedure. Same nothing. After that, the alarms didn't stop. Not every night, but most. Always between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the morning. It got so that we expected it. You'd lie in bed, not sleeping, just waiting for it to go off. The anticipation was worse than the sound. Some nights it didn't happen, and it was like our bodies didn't know what to do with themselves. I'd stare at the ceiling in the dark, watching shadows move across the tiles and jump every time the air conditioning kicked on. Even when it was quiet, it wasn't peaceful. People started getting sick. Not sick like the flu, but sick in a tired kind of way. People looked drained, eyes half shut, heads down in class. You'd hear people snap at each other for no reason. One girl down the hall had a full-on panic attack in the laundry room because the dryer buzzer startled her. I saw her afterwards sitting against the wall, holding her knees, rocking slightly, her breathing fast and shallow. That kind of thing became normal. It didn't take long for students to start asking questions. Why was this happening? Why only in our building? We started calling it the 2 a.m. curse. Some people joked about it, but most of us were just tired. Rumors started floating around. Some said it was a prank. Others said someone was trying to get out of midterms. One guy insisted there was something wrong with the electrical wiring, but no one had answers, and the university didn't say anything, at least not publicly. I'm not the kind of person who usually gets involved in stuff. I mostly keep to myself, but I couldn't take it anymore. I hadn't had a full night's sleep in weeks. My grades were slipping. I was starting to feel paranoid. I'd hear sounds in the hallway and jerk upright in bed. I'd feel nauseous in the mornings, a kind of sick that came from pure exhaustion. So one day, after another 2:30 a.m. fire alarm and a cold 4 a.m. return to bed, I decided I was going to figure out what the hell was going on. I started small. I went to the RA. She looked like hell, honestly. Big dark circles under her eyes. She didn't even pretend to be surprised when I asked about the alarms. She just shrugged and said it was being handled by maintenance. When I asked if they knew what was causing it, she said probably a sensor issue. But it was clear she didn't really know, or didn't care anymore. Next, I went to the maintenance office. They didn't like me asking questions. The guy at the desk looked annoyed, but I didn't back off. I asked if the alarms were being triggered by something specific. At first, he said it was confidential, then said they were investigating. I asked if they found anything yet. He said, "Look, it's not dangerous, just annoying. You'll survive." That didn't sit right with me. If it wasn't dangerous, why wasn't it fixed? Why wasn't it happening in other buildings? I started watching the alarm panels in the hallways. One night when the alarm went off, I got dressed and went downstairs instead of going outside. I wanted to see which zone had triggered it. The panel blinked Zone 3, which was near the boiler room at the back of the building. That was my first real lead. I waited until a Sunday when most people were out. I walked down to the boiler room. The door was locked, of course, but it wasn't too hard to follow someone in. A guy from maintenance came out just as I was standing nearby with my phone out, pretending to be on a call. I slipped in behind him before the door shut. It was warm inside. Not hot like I expected, but damp and close. The kind of warm that sticks to your skin. Pipes ran along the ceiling, and the hum of machines filled the air like a low growl. I found a panel labeled Zone 3. It was right near an old water heater, rusted on the bottom, with a puddle forming beneath it. There were signs of leakage, dark streaks on the wall behind it, corrosion on the base. And directly above the heater was a smoke detector. It looked newer than the others. A replacement, maybe. I stood there looking at it for a long time. The heater would make a sound every few minutes, a low click followed by a sudden hiss of steam. I wondered if the steam was setting off the detector. I took some photos, then got out of there before anyone caught me. Then I did some research. I learned that faulty water heaters can sometimes cause false alarms if they release steam near smoke detector, especially older units that leak or cycle too often. If the steam condenses into mist and hits the detector just right, it can be read as smoke. And if the detector was extra sensitive, maybe a replacement put in too close to the heater, it would make sense. The next day, I emailed facilities. I included the photos. I explained my theory. I even cited the research. They didn't respond. A week went by. More alarms. I emailed again. Nothing. Then I went to the student housing office. I asked to speak with the director. She wasn't in. I asked for her email. They gave it to me reluctantly. I forwarded everything to her. No reply. Finally, I started printing out flyers. I put them up in the lobby, the stairwells, the laundry room. Why are the alarms still going off? Faulty water heater in zone may 3rd be the cause. School won't fix it. We deserve answers. I added my email and said anyone with more info should contact me. That got their attention. The next day, the flyers were gone. Every one of them. Scrubbed clean like they'd never existed. I got a message in my campus inbox. It was from the director. She asked to meet in person. I went to her office that afternoon. She was polite, but careful. She said she appreciated my concern, that they were reviewing the situation. I asked her point blank if the water heater was causing the alarms. She said she couldn't comment on ongoing investigations. I told her I had pictures. I told her I knew it was steam. She didn't deny it. She just said, "We are aware of the issue and are working within our budget constraints to address it." Budget constraints. That was it. The heater was old, the alarms were annoying, but as long as there was no actual fire, they weren't going to fix it. It was cheaper to let us suffer. No one would die, just lose sleep, miss class, wreck their mental health. I left angry. I didn't yell or slam doors. I just walked out, sat on the curb outside, and stared at the sidewalk. I felt tired in a way I didn't know how to describe. Not just physically. It was like a weight in my chest. I kept documenting everything. The dates, the times. I started a spreadsheet. I talked to other students. Some joined in. We started a petition. We posted online. We tagged the university's accounts. We got a couple hundred signatures in 2 days. Local news picked up a tweet. The story started to spread. That's what finally did it. Pressure. Embarrassment. When people outside the university started asking questions, they couldn't ignore us anymore. A week after the article ran, maintenance came in and replaced the water heater. Quietly. No announcement. No apology. The alarm stopped. Just like that, the nights were quiet again. At first, I couldn't sleep. I was used to waking up at 2:30, waiting for that noise. But it didn't come. My body didn't know what to do with the silence. But slowly, I started sleeping again. People smiled in the hallways, laughed. It was like waking up from a long sickness. I still think about it sometimes. How close we came to just letting it keep happening. How willing the school was to do nothing. And how sometimes the only way to get change is to drag the truth into the light, even if you're exhausted and alone. I learned something that semester. Not about fire alarms, about people, about institutions, and about how silence can be louder than anything when it goes on long enough. It was my second year at university, and I had finally settled into some sort of rhythm with studying. My first year was chaotic. Moving into a new place, meeting new people, figuring out how much time I needed to put into coursework without completely burning out. I found my groove by the time second year rolled around. I'd wake up, go to lectures, maybe hit the gym, and then study in the evenings. It wasn't exciting, but it was working. Our library was a massive 5-floor building built back in the 60s. It had gone through renovations here and there, mostly cosmetic. New lights, fresh paint, touchscreen checkouts, but the bones of the place were old. The kind of old that creaks and hums when no one else is around. The kind of old that hides things in the walls no one's looked at in 50 years. There was a floor labeled Quiet Zone, the 3rd floor. It was marketed as a completely silent study area, perfect for people who couldn't handle distractions. No phones, no group discussions, no laptops with sound. Just you, your books, and your thoughts. I'd started using it during exam season, when I needed to focus the most. I remember the first time I went there. The silence wasn't just silence. It was deeper than that. It felt heavy, not creepy, just oppressive, like the sound had been sucked out of the air. You could hear every tiny shuffle, every breath, every time someone turned a page. I didn't think much of it. I just thought it was well insulated or something. But then I noticed something strange. After spending 2 or 3 hours studying there, I'd leave with this weird pressure in my head. It wasn't quite a headache. It felt like someone was squeezing the inside of my skull, just gently, like my brain was being inflated slowly. It would fade once I left, so again, I didn't think much of it. I figured it was eye strain or dehydration. I mentioned it offhand to one of my friends, and they laughed. Said they'd stopped using that floor ages ago for the same reason. Said it made them dizzy and kind of nauseous, like motion sickness without the motion. I thought they were being dramatic, but then I started paying more attention. One day, I sat there for nearly 4 hours revising pathology notes. When I finally packed up and stood, the whole room shifted. Not literally, but it felt like I'd stood too fast, even though I hadn't. I staggered a bit. My ears were ringing faintly. I went down the stairs instead of taking the lift, and by the time I got to the ground floor, the feeling was gone. I didn't tell anyone. I figured maybe I just needed more sleep, or better posture, or more breaks. But I started timing how long I could stay on that floor before the symptoms kicked in. On average, it was about 2.5 hours before the dull pressure in my head began. Any longer than that, and I'd get dizzy. And once, around the 4-hour mark, I had a weird flicker in my vision, like I'd blinked and missed half a second of time. I'm not the paranoid type, but the more I thought about it, the weirder it seemed. Why only that floor? The other floors were fine. I could spend 6 hours in a group study room on the second floor with no issues. I could even sit outside on a bench and do the same amount of reading with no headache. But every time I used the third floor, the quiet zone, it happened again. I started looking into it. I didn't want to go around asking people directly because it sounded ridiculous. But I started scrolling through student forums looking for anything related to the library. I found a few scattered posts. Nothing major, just people saying they didn't like the atmosphere on the third floor. One person said it gave them migraines. Another said they had fainted there once. The thread wasn't long, and most people ignored it. But there was a pattern. At this point, I was curious more than anything else. I started bringing my old phone with me, one with a built-in magnetic sensor. It had a basic EMF meter app I downloaded years ago for fun during a ghost tour in Edinburgh. I didn't believe in that stuff, but the app still worked, and it was accurate enough for measuring magnetic fields, at least at a basic level. On a random Wednesday afternoon, I took it with me to the third floor. I opened the app, expecting the usual background readings. For context, the Earth's natural magnetic field is about 0.5 Gauss. Normal indoor levels might be 0.2 to 0.7 milligauss, depending on the electronics nearby. I walked around the floor holding my phone low and slow. At first, the readings were within normal range, around 0.4 to 0.7 milligauss. Nothing strange, but then as I got closer to the back row of study desks, where I usually sat, the meter spiked. It jumped to 2.5 milligauss, then 3.1, then back down to 1.9. I waved the phone around in the air, thinking maybe it was picking up interference from something. But there weren't any visible electronics there. No computers, just desks, chairs, and a few old lights. I walked toward one of the pillars near the windows. The reading jumped again, 5.8 milligauss. That wasn't just weird, it was high. Prolonged exposure to anything over 2 milligauss has been linked to all sorts of things. Headaches, fatigue, memory issues. Even worse, depending on how long and how often you're exposed. I checked the ceiling. Nothing unusual, just drop tiles and fluorescent lights. I checked the floor. Same carpet as the rest of the building. But when I leaned against the pillar and looked out the window, I could see the edge of the building's older service entrance, just below. A rusted-out stairwell that led to the maintenance floor under the library. I'd never seen anyone go in or out of it. Over the next few days, I made it a habit to scan more of the floor. The EMF spikes were mostly concentrated near the outer edge of the building, the wall that faced the back lot. The strange thing was, on the second floor, the floor directly below, the readings were completely normal in the same spots. Whatever was happening, it was confined to the quiet zone floor. Eventually, I went down to the first floor and asked at the front desk if there were floor plans available for the library. I said I was doing a report on architectural design. The student worker handed me an old laminated brochure with a rough layout. It didn't show anything below ground, though, just 5 public floors. But as I was walking out, I noticed a door labeled restricted access, facility staff only near the east stairwell. It was always locked. I'd never seen anyone go in or out. But I remembered seeing a maintenance worker walk toward that area one evening with a key card and vanish inside. So I waited. For 2 days, I hung out near that hallway after 6 p.m., acting like I was scrolling on my phone. Eventually, I saw someone go in again. This time, the door took longer to close. I caught a glimpse inside. Bare concrete walls, old wiring exposed, flickering yellow lights. And then the door shut. I didn't try to sneak in. I wasn't about to get expelled over something like that. But the more I thought about it, the more things added up. That maintenance area had to be directly beneath the quiet zone floor. Whatever was down there, old equipment, maybe transformers or backup generators, it was giving off enough electromagnetic interference to bleed through the floor above. And here's the thing, EMFs, especially high-frequency or fluctuating ones, can mess with the human body. That's not conspiracy. That's basic physics. The body has its own electrical systems, nerves, brain waves, heart signals. If you're exposed to enough interference, it can disrupt all of that. Nausea, dizziness, short-term memory loss, even blackouts. I decided to write an email to campus services, phrasing it carefully. I included some screenshots of the readings from my phone and noted the symptoms I and others had felt. I didn't accuse anyone. I just suggested they investigate the possibility of high EMF exposure on the third floor. I never got a direct reply, but 2 weeks later, they closed the quiet zone floor for repairs. It stayed shut for over a month. When it reopened, the layout was different. The old desks near the windows were gone. New LED lighting had been installed. A sign had been added near the stairwell. Limit study sessions to 2 hours. Take regular breaks. I brought the same EMF meter app back. The readings had dropped significantly. Most areas were back to normal, 0.5 milligauss or lower. Whatever was down there, whatever ancient infrastructure had been leaking radiation through the floor, they must have fixed it, or at least covered it up. No one talked about it. There wasn't an article in the student paper. No mention in any newsletter. Just a quiet renovation. A silent problem, quietly solved. I still study there sometimes. The silence is still deep, but now it feels normal. I can spend hours there without the pressure building behind my eyes. No disinis, no flickering vision. But I think about it sometimes. How many students sat there for years, thinking it was just stress or burnout? How many headaches were written off as dehydration or lack of sleep? How many people blacked out and never reported it? I wonder if anyone got hurt long term. I wonder if anyone ever sued, or if the university paid them off quietly. I still have the old EMF readings saved on that phone. I keep them not because I plan to use them, but as a reminder. Sometimes the scariest things aren't the loudest. Sometimes the most dangerous places are the ones that feel safest. Silent, clean, hidden in plain sight. I started noticing it during my second year at university. I was majoring in sociology, and even though I didn't love the subject, it felt manageable, and I thought I could coast through it while figuring out what I really wanted to do. There was this course, Sociological Theories 2, mandatory and notoriously dense. Every semester, students dreaded it, not because of the material, but because the TA's teaching assistants never lasted. It was like a pattern. I'd heard about it in whispers the year before. People joked that the TAs in that department had some sort of curse on them. Some said the course was just so badly structured that nobody could keep up with the workload. Others thought it had something to do with a particular professor, but no one knew for sure. In my second semester, I enrolled in that course, and that's when I really started paying attention. Our TA, Rachel, was a PhD student. She seemed sharp, organized, and genuinely helpful. For the first few weeks, she answered every question in our discussion sessions and sent us long emails clarifying readings. Then, out of nowhere, she stopped showing up. No warning. One Thursday, she was explaining Marx's concept of alienation, and by the next Tuesday, the department had announced she was no longer working with the class. They brought in a new TA, Thomas, who seemed nice enough but looked perpetually tired. He barely made eye contact and rarely replied to emails. He lasted 3 weeks. Then he vanished too. After the third replacement TA came and went, I started digging. At first, I tried not to make a big deal out of it. I asked around casually. I told people I was thinking about becoming a TA myself next year and just wanted to understand the role. Most students didn't have a clue. Some remember names, others shrugged it off. Professors were more guarded. When I asked Professor Klein, who taught our critical theory seminar, he said something vague about academic transitions and changed the subject. I started keeping a list. Over the past 4 semesters, this one course had burned through 9 TAs. That wasn't normal. Other departments had TAs stick around for years. In psychology, one PhD student ran 3 different tutorials a week and still managed to publish. I started wondering if it was something systemic, something more than just bad luck. I began visiting the department office more often, pretending to look for forms or schedules. I glanced at the TA office door. Sometimes I'd catch someone inside, hunched over a laptop, surrounded by papers. Most times it was empty. I once saw a TA crying quietly behind the printer and pretended not to notice. That image stuck with me. Eventually, I found an excuse to email the department's graduate coordinator, asking if I could volunteer to assist a TA. I said I was interested in academia. She replied politely, but said they didn't offer that option. Still, She thanked me for my enthusiasm. Something about her wording felt rehearsed, like she'd said it many times before. Then I met Lena. She was a former TA who had left the university altogether. I tracked her down through an alumni networking page and reached out under the pretense of asking about grad school. She agreed to meet me at a cafe off campus. She looked exhausted. Even months after leaving, she carried this worn-out energy. Her eyes darted around like she was waiting for someone to interrupt us. I told her I was curious about the turnover of TAs in the sociology department. At first, she deflected, said it was normal that academia wasn't for everyone. But after a while, she leaned in and started talking. Not about ghosts or curses, just pressure. She told me how the department pushed unrealistic expectations onto TAs. They were expected to grade over 100 papers in less than a week, led discussion groups, be available for office hours, help professors with research, answer student emails around the clock. And most of them were also trying to write dissertations, publish papers, apply for grants. Sleep was rare. Mental health took a dive. She'd started experiencing panic attacks. She'd cry in the bathroom between tutorials. When she went to her advisor for help, she was told to manage her time better. When she asked for reduced hours, they reminded her she was lucky to even have funding. That was the catch. If she quit the TA job, she'd lose her stipend. And without that, she couldn't afford tuition. So she quit everything, dropped out, moved back home. She said she still couldn't read certain books without feeling nauseous. After our conversation, I couldn't stop thinking about what she said. I started noticing more. In the library, I'd see grad students passed out on couches. I overheard one TA telling another that he hadn't eaten in 2 days because he was trying to meet a grading deadline. Some wore the same clothes all week. I talked to a few more former TAs. Most of them didn't want to speak. A couple sent short emails confirming Lena's story, but didn't elaborate. One said, "It's just not worth getting involved again." I started documenting everything. I made a spreadsheet of names, courses, term dates, and when each TA quit. I gathered screenshots from discussion forums, archived emails, anything that might help show a pattern. It was all pointing to the same thing. TAs were being worked beyond their limits, and the department was keeping it quiet to avoid scrutiny. At that point, I didn't know what to do with the information. I considered writing an article for the campus paper, but the editor said they couldn't publish it without more direct sources. I tried talking to the student union, but they said TA contracts were outside their jurisdiction. So I decided to write everything down, clearly, calmly, like a report. I compiled testimonies, anonymized names, and laid out the timeline. I included charts, quotes, everything I could. Then I sent it to the university's internal review office. They had a whistleblower form. I didn't sign my name. Weeks passed. I didn't hear anything. Then I noticed changes. One of the professors in the department went on administrative leave. They brought in a new graduate coordinator. They quietly reduced the number of students per TA group. Deadlines became more flexible. Office hours were split between more staff. I never got an email or a thank you. I didn't want one. I just wanted it to stop. I wanted the TAs to sleep, to eat, to read a book without feeling sick. I still think about Lena sometimes. I wish she'd held on a little longer, but I understand why she didn't. No one should have to break just to teach a class. In my final year, I passed by the same TA office I used to glance into. It was full. Not just one TA at a desk, but 3, talking, laughing. I kept walking, but something felt lighter in the air. Something had shifted. Maybe not enough, but something. That's how change starts. Quiet, tired, but real. It started with hunger. Not anything poetic or deep, just real, simple hunger. The kind that creeps in when you're up too late trying to finish an assignment and you've burned through your last granola bar hours ago. It was close to midnight, maybe a little after, and the vending machines in the dorms were all out of anything edible. I had already checked every floor. All that was left were stale crackers, crushed chips, and some ancient chocolate bars that looked like they'd melted and reformed over 10 semesters. I was at my limit. I hadn't eaten dinner. I skipped it because I thought I'd just grab something later, but later came and I was stuck. The student center closed at 10. The late night food trucks didn't come around on Mondays. I remember sitting there at my desk, stomach aching and staring out my dorm window toward the other buildings, toward the cafeteria. The lights were still on in the cafeteria. I could see the dull, white glow spilling out from the small, high windows, the ones near the back service doors. I figured maybe a janitor had forgotten to switch them off, or maybe someone was still cleaning. I didn't think too much about it, but the doors, the ones on the east side, they weren't locked. I found that out by accident. I was walking past, heading toward the back in the stupid hope that maybe someone left a leftover tray of something near the back door trash bins. And then I noticed the glass door gave when I pushed it. I stopped, looked around. No one was there. No sounds either. Just the buzzing of those horrible sodium lights and the hum of the refrigerators inside. The door opened like it always did. No alarm, no criac. It just swung inward. The smell hit me first. Warm, meaty, stale. Not bad exactly. It just smelled like food. Cooked food. Not rotting garbage or industrial soap. Actual food. It felt like walking into a place where dinner had just been served. I stepped in. Everything was clean. Too clean. Chairs pushed in. Tables wiped. The tile floor was shiny under the fluorescent lights. But the steam tables on the main line were still on. That's what caught my attention the most. The metal trays were full. One had some kind of rice dish, another had meatballs and red sauce, and one had something like mac and cheese. It looked fresh. It was strange, but not terrifying. Just strange. At the time, I thought maybe the kitchen staff had made too much and were just tossing it, or maybe the food was meant for a private event that had ended early. I hadn't seen any announcements or flyers, but I didn't care. I was hungry. I grabbed a plate. They were stacked near the drink station. Warm too, like they had just come out of the dishwasher. I hesitated for maybe 5 seconds before I scooped some rice and meatballs onto a plate and sat down at one of the nearby tables. It tasted fine. Not great. Not even good, really. A little too salty. The rice was sticky and oily, like it had been reheated a few times. The meatballs were soft, almost mushy. But I kept eating. I cleaned the plate. I was still hungry, so I went back for more. I added mac and cheese this time. That one tasted better, but I could tell something was off with the cheese. It had that cloying, heavy aftertaste like it had too much preservative in it. After I ate, I put my plate on the tray return belt and left. No one stopped me. No one even saw me. I got back to my dorm and fell asleep around 1 a.m. The next morning, I felt a little off. Nothing serious, just a dull ache in my stomach. I chalked it up to eating too fast or eating greasy food on an empty stomach. I skipped breakfast and went to class. By noon, I was fine again. It wasn't until that night, around the same time, that I thought about the cafeteria again. The lights were still on. Same dull glow. Same silent invitation. So I went again. And again, the doors were unlocked. Again, the food was there, almost like it had been refilled. The trays weren't empty, and the food looked a little different. This time there was pasta with some thick cream sauce, grilled chicken strips, and mashed potatoes. I ate again, and the pattern repeated. I started going every night that week. No one was ever there. No staff. No security. No other students. Just me and trays of hot, average food. The light stayed on, and the door never locked. I never brought it up to anyone. I knew how it sounded. If I told people I was sneaking into the cafeteria at midnight and finding trays of food waiting for me, they'd laugh or report me. So I didn't say anything, but I started paying attention. First thing I noticed was the taste. Every night the food had a weird flavor, like it had sat out too long or had been reheated too many times. The meats were soft and gray, and the sauces always had a strange thickness, like they were over-reduced or left in a warmer for hours. The vegetables, when they were there, were usually soggy. The broccoli was often brown at the tips. The green beans were limp and tasted metallic. Then came the stomach issues. At first, it was mild, just some bloating, cramps, occasional diarrhea. Then I started waking up in the middle of the night with sharp pain just under my ribs. I thought maybe I was just reacting badly to grease. But it kept happening, 2 or 3 times a week. And I wasn't alone. One night, maybe 2 weeks into this weird routine, I saw someone else walk into the cafeteria while I was there. A guy. I didn't know him, but he looked like a student. Wore one of those oversized hoodies and flip-flops. He didn't say anything to me. He didn't even look at me. Just grabbed a plate, scooped up food, and sat at the far end of the room. I watched him eat. He seemed tired, pale maybe, or just worn down. The next night, he was back. And so was a girl I'd never seen before. Same thing. No words. Just silent eating. By the end of the third week, I counted at least 6 other people who came in between midnight and 1. Some came alone, some in pairs. No one acknowledged anyone else. Everyone just ate quickly and left. It felt like a secret club we didn't agree to join. I started asking quiet questions during the day. Nothing direct, just feeling around. I asked people how they liked the food on campus, if anyone had gotten food poisoning lately, if the dining halls were open late for some reason. Most people said the food was trash, but no one knew about late-night access. A few people joked that the meat always tasted weird. Someone mentioned that their roommate had been sick all week with some kind of stomach bug. That's when I got curious. I went online and started digging. Not public forums. Those were useless, but the campus health board records. Most of it was protected, but a few PDFs were open access. In one of them, a report on dining hall safety compliance from the semester before. There was a note in the appendix. It mentioned isolated GI symptoms in 12 students, suspected food-related, under review. No official cause listed, just a statement that food safety inspections had been passed. I went deeper. There was an old Reddit post from someone who claimed they got violently sick after eating beef stew from a main dining hall. The post had no replies. No botes. It had been deleted, but I found a cached version. Another comment, buried in a long thread about cafeteria quality, mentioned that sometimes the food at night is better than the stuff during the day. That comment was 2 years old. I didn't know what to make of it. I thought maybe I was being paranoid, but I kept going back, even after the stomach pain, even after I started getting dizzy in the mornings. I kept eating the food, until one night I saw them unloading crates. It was past 2 a.m. I couldn't sleep, so I went for a walk. I passed near the loading dock behind the cafeteria and saw a van. No college logo, no markings, backed up to the delivery entrance. 2 men were unloading crates. Not the usual food service type. These are plain gray plastic bins like storage containers. I watched from behind a bush across the lot. They worked fast, pulled about a dozen crates out, wheeled them inside, and then drove off without a word. I waited until they were gone before I approached the door. It was closed, locked, no way in. But I heard something, machinery humming, and a faint clatter like trays or pans being moved. The next night, the food had changed again. New items. Fish this time. Stew. Something that smelled like boiled cabbage. The fish had a rubbery texture. The stew was too salty, and the cabbage was pale yellow. I stopped halfway through the meal. My stomach hurt just looking at the plate. That night, I didn't sleep. I was laying in bed feeling sick, trying not to throw up. I had cold sweats. My mouth was dry. I kept thinking about those crates. Where they came from. Why they were being unloaded at 2 a.m. The next morning, I went to the library and searched old news articles from the town. I had to dig through years of local papers, archived in their terrible online interface. After a few hours, I found what I didn't know I was looking for. 3 years ago, the college had signed a deal with local food vendors to buy bulk stock at discount prices. That wasn't suspicious by itself. Most schools do it. But the article had a quote from a student union rep saying the school had agreed to help local businesses avoid waste. I clicked through to an article about the vendors. Several of them had been cited for improper food storage. One of them, a local meat supplier, had failed 3 inspections due to temperature control issues and stockpile mislabeling. Another vendor had been caught relabeling expired dry goods. The school had bought their surplus, and I was eating it. That night, I didn't go to the cafeteria. I stayed in my room, and I started noticing things in my second year. There were always stories about the old lecture hall. Everyone said it was the first building that was ever constructed on campus. It had that look too, dusty red brick, ivy crawling up the walls, old warped windows with paint chipping off their frames. It always smelled like mold and metal inside, and it was colder than it had any right to be, even in summer. No one liked taking classes there, but I didn't have a choice. My Monday and Wednesday classes were both scheduled in room 204. I hated that room. There were parts of the building that felt strange, not haunted exactly, just off. The stairs creaked too loudly, the doors shut too hard. The lights buzzed in a way I could feel in my teeth. But what started getting my attention was the staircase near the east wing. That one always seemed to go higher than it should. You could see the flights go up, ground to first, first to second, and so on. But the last flight, past the 4th floor, wasn't labeled. No sign, no door, just more stairs. And nobody ever went up them. Or at least I thought no one did. One late afternoon, I was leaving class and heading down the main stairs when I heard footsteps above me. They were steady, like someone climbing or walking along a corridor. But I looked up and there was no one there. No sado, no silhouette. Just the last flight of stairs ending in a wall. I stood there, watching for a while, until the lights above flickered once, then twice, and then everything was quiet again. I didn't mention it to anyone. What was I going to say? That I heard footsteps in a building where the elevators barely worked and the whole place sounded like a horror movie? No one would have cared. Everyone already knew the old hall was weird. But then I started noticing who was missing. It wasn't a lot of people, just 1 or 2 every couple of weeks. People I'd seen in class or at the dining hall or sitting in the library. You'd see them every day for months, and then suddenly you didn't. Sometimes people transferred or dropped out, but these students didn't make announcements, didn't say goodbye. They just stopped coming. I only started keeping track after seeing Henry at the vending machine one day. He was in my literature seminar. Always wore the same dark blue hoodie and scribbled notes like he was scared someone would read his mind. That day, I watched him from the corner of my eye. He bought a Coke, stuffed it in his hoodie pocket, and went toward the old lecture hall. It was late, past 6. No classes were scheduled that late. I checked, but he went in anyway, and I didn't see him again after that. 2 days later, I asked the professor if Henry had dropped. He blinked a few times and said he thought Henry had transferred, but his name was still on the attendance sheet. I started staying after classes, watching the staircase in the east wing. Every once in a while, I saw someone go up the unmarked flight. Never the same person. Always alone. Always looking around first like they didn't want to be seen. And they never came back down. I'd wait an hour, sometimes 2, pretending to read or study. No one ever came back down those stairs. I got obsessed. I told myself it was just curiosity, but I knew it was more than that. I started doing my own digging. I went to the administration building, looked through floor plans and building permits. Nothing showed a 5th floor, 4 floors and a roof. That's it. But I knew what I saw. I even went to the facilities office, pretending to be a journalism student working on a piece. They gave me a generic pamphlet and told me I should talk to the history department if I wanted more. The history department was no help either. An old professor said the 5th floor was just a myth. Probably people getting turned around in the stairwells. Buildings that old were easy to get lost in. I didn't believe it. None of it made sense. I decided I was going up myself. I planned it for a Friday night. I waited until the building was mostly empty, around 8, when even the late labs had ended. I brought a flashlight, a pack of protein bars, water, and my phone fully charged. I even wore hiking boots. I told myself I'd go up, take a few pictures, and come right back down, just to prove it to myself. The first few flights were normal. The lights were dim, but they worked. The stairwells smelled like dust and rubber, like old textbooks and floor wax. I got to the 4th floor, stood for a moment, then turned and climbed the last set of stairs. At the top was a narrow metal door. No handle, just a small rectangular push plate. I hesitated, then pressed it. The door clicked open with a hiss like it hadn't been opened in years. Inside was darkness. Total, thick, absolute darkness. I turned on my flashlight. The beam cut through the black and revealed a narrow hallway with concrete walls, low ceilings, and exposed piping. It looked nothing like the rest of the building. It felt more like a storage bunker than a floor in a lecture hall. The air was still and stale, like it hadn't moved in years. I moved slowly, every footstep echoing too loud. Old desks, chairs, and broken filing cabinets were piled haphazardly against the walls. Some were tagged with paper labels, the ink faded and curled. A whiteboard was cracked down the middle, still bearing half a chemical equation in dry marker. I kept going, passing rusted metal doors with no labels. I tried a few. Most were locked. One swung open and revealed a storage closet packed with boxes. I stepped in and pulled one open. Inside were stacks of ID cards. Student IDs. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. All with faces. All with names. Some I recognized. My stomach dropped. I backed out and kept moving. Further down the hall, there was a small window set high in the wall. I climbed onto a crate and looked out. The city lights were below me. Not level. Below. I was at least 5 or 6 stories up. I turned back, ready to leave. But when I got to the door, it wouldn't open. I pushed and kicked, but it didn't budge. The flashlight flickered and panic kicked in. I slammed on the metal, shouted, tried calling someone. No signal. I ran back, tried other doors. Locked, locked, locked. I found a maintenance room and sat down, trying to calm myself. I told myself someone would find me. I hadn't told anyone where I was going. I hadn't even thought to. That was the worst part. The night was long. Cold air came from somewhere, but there was no heating. The silence was the worst, broken only by the groan of pipes and the occasional drip of water. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I thought I heard footsteps. Not close, just distant, soft, like someone else was trapped too. Morning came, and nothing changed. No sounds of the building coming to life. No voices, just the same gray light through the small window. I rationed my food, waited, screamed again. Nothing. On the third day, I found a narrow shaft behind one of the locked doors I'd forced open. It was probably meant for maintenance or ventilation. It went down, far down. I tied my hoodie sleeves together, hooked it to a pipe, and climbed. I don't know how long it took, but eventually I reached a hatch. It opened into a supply closet on the second floor. I stumbled out, covered in dust and sweat, and walked straight into a janitor who screamed and dropped his mom. They called campus security, took statements. I told them everything. They didn't believe me, said I must have gotten disoriented, got locked in a closet, hallucinated the rest. But they couldn't explain the student IDs I'd stuffed in my backpack. They couldn't explain why my phone had dozens of photos from a place no one admitted existed. A week later, I went back to the building. The staircase was sealed. Concrete poured over the entrance. No sign it had ever been there. I checked the records again. The building was reclassified, now listed as having only 3 floors and an attic. I dropped out a month later, not because I was scared, but because I couldn't focus anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that hallway. Every time I heard footsteps behind me, I flinched. But worst of all, I started seeing the missing students again. Not in person, in photos, online. Someone posted a group photo from orientation. I counted 5 faces I knew had gone missing, all in the back row, all staring straight ahead. The 5th floor doesn't exist, but it's there. I've been there. I got out. Others didn't. If you're smart, you'll stay away. And if you're not, I hope you're carrying extra water. I lived in one of the older dorm buildings on the edge of campus. It was one of those long, gray concrete blocks with narrow windows and a permanent smell of dust and stale air. The floors creaked even though they were concrete, and the hallways always felt colder than they should have been. The building had been used less over the years. Most students requested the newer dorms closer to the library or student union, with better heating and Wi-Fi. Mine was the last floor still in regular use. The elevator in that building had always been out of order. At least, that's what the sign said. There was a printed sheet of paper taped over the button panel on every floor. Out of order. Use stairs. It was yellowed, and the edges curled from years of being left alone. No one talked about it. I assumed it was just a hazard. Maybe the wiring was bad. Maybe it got stuck too often. The building only had 5 floors, so the stairs weren't that bad. Still, every now and then I heard it. I'd be walking back from class or staying up late to study in the lounge, and I'd hear a low mechanical hum coming from behind the elevator doors. Once or twice, I felt a faint vibration through the floor. I asked a guy on the 2nd floor if he'd ever seen it move, and he just shrugged and said the doors never opened. That was it. Everyone ignored it. One night in early November, I stayed back on campus to work on an assignment. Most people had gone home for the long weekend. The hallways were dead quiet, and the overhead lights flickered occasionally like they hadn't been replaced in years. I was coming up the stairs around 2 a.m., lugging my backpack and a bottle of half-warm water. When I passed the elevator on the 4th floor, I heard the hum again. But this time, the display above the door was lit. It said B1. I froze. There was no B1 in this building. The main floor was G, then 1 through 5. I'd been in and out of the stairwell dozens of times and never seen anything labeled B1 or basement. I waited, staring at the red numbers on the panel. The hum faded and the light went off. I don't know what made me do it. Curiosity, boredom, maybe just plain stupidity. I pulled the paper off the button panel and pressed the call button. Nothing happened. I pressed it again. The button lit up, and then I heard the motor. The elevator was moving. I stepped back. It groaned like something very old had been forced into motion again. When the doors opened, the lights inside flickered on slowly, one tube at a time. The floor looked dusty but solid. The button panel inside looked old too. Scratched metal with circular buttons, like something from the 70s. I stepped inside. I didn't press anything. I just wanted to look. The doors closed behind me on their own. I hit the door open button immediately, but nothing happened. The elevator began to move down. I pressed the emergency button, but there was no sound. The panel didn't even light up. I hit G, then 1, then every button. Nothing. The lights flickered again. I felt my stomach tighten. The elevator stopped after what felt like a full minute. The panel above the door read B2, not B1. There was no sound in the shaft anymore, just stillness. The doors opened. I didn't want to step out, but I didn't want to stay in either. I looked out. The hallway beyond the doors was concrete, unfinished, with rough walls and pipes running along the ceiling. The lights were dimmed and spaced far apart. The floor was dusty, and it smelled like mold, rust, and something sharp like burnt wiring or stale air that hadn't moved in years. I leaned out and looked both ways. There were doors along the hallway, all metal, no labels. Some were slightly ajar. I thought maybe I'd found an old service level, maybe a mechanical floor or boiler room. I stepped out slowly. Behind me, the elevator doors closed. I turned around and ran back, but there were no buttons on the wall outside. No panel, nothing, just smooth metal doors. I banged on them a few times and stopped. It felt pointless. No one was around. No one would hear me. I took out my phone. No signal. 1 bar of battery left. I turned on a flashlight and started walking. I kept telling myself I'd find a stairwell, a service exit, something. This was part of the university. It had to be connected somewhere. I passed more metal doors. Some were bolted shut. Others looked like they hadn't been opened in years. Dust was thick on the floor. My footsteps sounded louder than they should have. There were water stains on the ceiling, and the lights kept flickering. I walked for maybe 10 minutes. No turns, no intersections. Just one long hallway. Eventually, I found a rusted stairwell door. It took me a while to force it open. It creaked painfully, and the hinges almost came off. Inside, the stairwell went both up and down. I tried going up first. The stairs ended after about 10 steps. The door at the top was welded shut. Someone had literally sealed it with metal. I tried banging on it, pulling at the seams, but it wouldn't budge. The handle had been removed. It felt more like a wall than a door. I went back down. The stairs spiraled deeper than I expected. One floor, then another, then another. No lavits. The air got colder. The light from my phone dimmed. The battery icon blinked red. At the bottom, the stairs ended in another hallway. This one was darker, with broken light fixtures and a sloped floor. I stepped forward, and the sound of my foot hitting a puddle echoed down the corridor. Water was dripping from somewhere. The walls were lined with old equipment. Fused boxes, rusted carts, collapsed shelves. There were broken signs in places, most of them unreadable. A few still had stencils. Utility Zone 3A or cold water main. I found a room with the door slightly open and pushed inside. There were shelves of broken equipment. Valves, pressure gauges, buckets of corroded bolts. In the corner, a small sink dripped water into a stain that had spread across the floor. I rushed to it. The faucet was dry, but I held my mouth to the drip. It tasted like metal and old pipes, but I drank anyway. I sat on the floor and tried to figure out how deep I'd gone. I checked my phone again, completely dead. I shut off the screen and put it in my pocket. There was no sense of time down there. No clocks, no windows, just endless corridors and silence. I didn't sleep. I just wandered. I kept expecting to hear footsteps or someone calling from up above. Nothing ever came. I rationed the sink water and chewed on a half-eaten granola bar I'd forgotten in my bag. My head pounded. I couldn't think straight. I started writing notes in my notebook just to stay sane. Where I'd walked, which doors I'd passed, what turns I'd taken. I marked corners with pen strokes or lines of dust scraped clean. The light overhead would flicker every few minutes, and I started using that as a rough count of time. Maybe every flicker was a few minutes, maybe an hour. I couldn't tell anymore. Once I heard a loud clang somewhere behind me, like a metal door slamming shut. I froze. I waited for footsteps, voices, anything. Nothing came, just silence. I don't know how long I stayed down there. Maybe 3 days. I felt weaker every hour. My legs shook. I tried yelling sometimes, but it just echoed down empty halls. Then one day, if it was day, I saw light. It was different from the flickering yellow bulbs. This light was white, steady, and brighter than anything else. It was coming from a narrow doorway at the end of one hallway. I staggered toward it. Inside, I found another elevator. It looked newer than the first one. The walls were cleaner, the buttons lit. There was no label on the door, but the panel inside had modern buttons, B2 through G. I pressed G with shaking hands. The doors closed. The elevator moved. When it opened, I was back on the ground floor. The lobby was empty. The old front desk was still there, dusty and unused. The lights were on, faintly. It felt like walking back into a different world. I stumbled out. My legs barely held me. I walked toward the entrance, pushed open the front doors, and collapsed on the steps outside. A campus security guard found me a few minutes later. He didn't say anything, just helped me up and called an ambulance. They thought I'd been locked in a storage area or got lost during renovations. I didn't explain. I couldn't. No one would have believed me. I spent 2 nights in the hospital. They said I was severely dehydrated. My kidneys were fine, but just barely. I'd lost 6 pounds. My phone was dead. The screen cracked from the damp air. When I came back to campus, the elevator was taped off completely. The paper sign was gone, replaced with an actual lockout system and a notice, condemned floor, do not access. I tried to ask around. No one had ever heard of AB2. One of the older maintenance guys said the building was built on top of an old service tunnel network in the 60s, used for heating and water systems. Most of it had been sealed decades ago when the school upgraded. No maps, no access points, just a forgotten part of campus infrastructure. I never found the original elevator again. The hallway it was in got sealed off a week later with drywall and caution tape. Someone didn't want people going down there anymore. Sometimes I dream about it. The lights flickering, the low hum of the elevator motor, the endless hallway. I wake up with my throat dry and my hands shaking. I don't use elevators anymore. I used to be the kind of student who ignored extra credit. If I couldn't get the grade with the regular assignments, I figured I probably didn't deserve it. But that changed in my 3rd year after I failed 2 midterms back to back, one in organic chemistry and the other in my urban infrastructure elective. I was tired, stressed, and probably making bad decisions, but I didn't want to repeat any classes. I couldn't afford another semester. The urban infrastructure course was one I picked just to meet a credit requirement. I thought it'd be easy. I was wrong. It was taught by Professor Marlin, an older guy with thinning white hair and a sharp face that made him look like he was always annoying. He was the kind of professor who read his notes word for word in class, rarely looked up, and answered questions with questions that didn't help. Most of the class had already mentally checked out by the 2nd week. When the midterms were returned, over half of us failed. I got a 42. I didn't even know what to say. I had studied. I hadn't just guessed my way through. I remember staring at the red marks across my answer sheet while he talked about responsibility and performance. Then he said something that I only half registered at the time. He said that students who failed could regain lost ground through extra credit, but only if we were willing to engage directly with the material in a practical environment. At first I thought that meant some kind of field project or report, but the reality turned out to be something stranger. A week later, I found a folded sheet of paper tucked under my door. I still don't know how it got there. It was typed with no name on it, just my student number at the top. The heading said Supplemental Infrastructure Survey Extra Credit Assignment. There was a list of instructions that didn't make much sense at first. I had to go to several different campus buildings and look for things like external gas line access points, structural reinforcement brackets, non-compliant ceiling fixtures, and restricted crawl space panel numbers. Each item had a location next to it, like Kinsley Hall basement hallway C or Fenwick building roof access ladder, west side. Some were in places students weren't supposed to go, or at least didn't normally go. At the bottom, it said, photographic evidence required. Submit on flash drive only. Do not email. I thought it was weird, but I needed the grade. The next day, I started checking places off the list. At first, it was kind of fun, like a scavenger hunt. I had to go into some older buildings I'd never even entered before, and most of the things I had to find weren't hard to locate. For example, in Phelps Hall, I found the gas line access point in a small storage room with cleaning supplies. I snapped a few pictures and moved on. But by the third building, things started to feel different. The deeper into the assignment I went, the stranger it got. Some of the items on the list didn't make sense. One said, observe and note the labeling on emergency sprinkler junctions in the second floor of the administration annex. When I got there, I found that the hallway was blocked by a locked gate. There was a notice saying authorized personnel only, asbestos abatement in progress. I looked through the gate and saw yellow tape down the hallway, but it was dusty and no one was there. I took a picture from behind the bars and made a note anyway. Another time, in the basement of Merton Hall, I had to crawl under a stairwell to reach an old electrical panel with broken switches and exposed wires. It smelled like mold, and the light flickered the whole time I was down there. I kept thinking about rats, or something worse. By the end of the week, I had finished the whole list. I put the photos and my notes onto a flash drive, labeled it, and dropped it off in a plain manila envelope at Professor Marlin's office mailbox. I didn't see him. I didn't talk to him. I figured that was it. But then something weird started happening. First, I didn't hear anything back. No email, no change in my grade on the student portal, nothing. Then, after a few days, I noticed that two guys who had been sitting behind me in class hadn't shown up since the day he handed out the extra credit info. One of them, I remembered, had mentioned trying the assignment. I didn't know them well, so I didn't think too much of it at first. People skip class all the time. But a week later, someone posted in the class forum asking if anyone had seen Tony V, since he dropped off his extra credit assignment. That's when I started paying more attention. I went back to the forum and searched for older posts. I found threads from last semester, different students, same stories. People had submitted the extra credit work and then either failed anyway, stopped attending classes, or just stopped posting altogether. It was a weird pattern. It was like they disappeared from everything school-related. One person posted a long rant about how her roommate had done a survey, turned it in, and then had some kind of breakdown. She dropped all her classes and moved back home. No one replied to the post. It was buried under other threads. The more I read, the more paranoid I got. I started thinking about the places I had gone during the assignment. Most of them were in buildings that hadn't been renovated in years. Some had rusted pipes, cracked ceilings, broken vents, frayed cables, and missing insulation. More than one hallway had water damage or black patches of what looked like mold. It hit me one night while I was scrolling through the photos I had taken for the assignment. These weren't just infrastructure examples. They were violations. Serious ones. The kind of stuff that would get a building shut down, or at least trigger an inspection. That was the first time I realized this wasn't just about extra credit. It was a kind of data gathering. But not for students, for someone else. I started asking questions. Carefully, I emailed the facilities office to ask about renovations in the admin annex. I never got a reply. I left a voicemail asking who was responsible for building inspections on campus. No call back. I even went to the student government office and asked if anyone had ever raised concerns about Merton Hall's condition. The girl at the front desk told me no one ever brought that kind of thing up. But you can always file a maintenance request, she said. Then one day, while I was walking out of the library, someone tapped me on the shoulder. It was a guy I recognized from another course. He looked nervous. He didn't even say anything. He just handed me a piece of paper and walked off. The note was short. It said, "Don't ask around. Just check the last page of your syllabus." I ran back to my dorm and pulled out the syllabus for urban infrastructure. The last page was a generic list of references, textbooks, links to government standards, and a short paragraph about optional research opportunities. That's when I noticed something strange. The font was different. It was smaller and lighter, like it had been added later. It said, for students seeking supplemental field experience, targeted survey directives are available upon request. Submission of findings may contribute to institutional safety goals. All participation is voluntary and confidential. That last word, confidential, bothered me. Why would an extra credit assignment be confidential? I dug deeper. I found a faculty directory and searched for Professor Marlin. There was no office phone listed, just a university email and a note that said he was part-time adjunct faculty. But I found something else. 10 years ago, he had published a research paper on building code compliance in aging college campuses. The paper had been pulled from the university archive. I only found it through a cached search. The abstract said something about ethical breaches in campus facility reporting and pressures to suppress non-compliant infrastructure issues due to funding threats. That's when everything clicked. The assignment wasn't for our benefit. It was for his. He had figured out a way to get students to collect the evidence he needed: photos, notes, locations, all the dirty secrets of a campus too cheap or too corrupt to fix its own buildings. Students like me were the tools. He probably used the data in reports or complaints. Maybe he thought if enough violations were documented, someone would take action. Maybe even try to leak it once. And maybe that's why the university fought back. I don't know how far up it goes. I don't know if someone in administration told him to stop or if he made a deal to stay quiet. But I do know one thing. None of the students who submitted those assignments ever got the extra credit, and some of them ended up failing the course. Maybe intentionally, maybe to discredit them. Some just dropped out like they couldn't take it anymore. Or maybe they were pressured, maybe even threatened. I stopped going to that class. I didn't withdraw, I just stopped showing up. I didn't want to risk whatever happened to the others. I focused on passing my other courses. I avoided campus buildings I didn't trust. I even moved off campus early, said I had family stuff. At the end of the semester, I got a notification that I had failed urban infrastructure. Just a flat F. No explanation. No grade adjustment. I didn't contest it. What was the point? But I still have the flash drive. I kept a copy of everything. The photos, the notes, even the strange assignments. I don't know if I'll ever use them. Maybe someday I'll send it to a journalist. Maybe I'll just delete it and try to forget. But every now and then, I check the campus news. I look for signs, articles about renovations, reports of students getting sick in old dorms, power outages, fires, mold complaints. They pop up now and then, but they never mention anything serious. Nothing about building violations. Nothing about Professor Marlin. It's like it never happened, but I know better. And now you do too. I always thought college would be a steady path. You go to classes, pass your exams, maybe struggle a little with your major, but eventually graduate. That was the track I was on. I wasn't special, just average. Not a top student, not failing either. Just there, trying to get through. I was in my third year when I first heard about the internship program through the university's main office. They had a centralized internship office located in the back corner of the administrative building, floor 3, past the registrar, just before the copy room. The office was nothing special. Fluorescent lights, off-white walls, and a glass window where students lined up. There was a big laminated sign posted. Internship office hours, 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., Monday through Friday. And underneath that, printed in smaller font. For official internship placements, students must register through this office only. Everyone said the internships from there were solid. Partnered companies, real work experience. You had to submit your application through their system and then wait for a confirmation email. It was supposed to be straightforward. I was already behind in finding one for the summer, so I figured I had nothing to lose. I went in on a Tuesday. It was quiet, barely any other students around. The woman at the front desk took my student ID and told me to fill out a digital form on the terminal beside the window. I typed in my student number, email, selected my major, GPA, and a few preferences for fields I wanted to intern in. After hitting submit, the screen just blinked and returned to the home screen. I waited, thinking there would be some kind of confirmation. Nothing came up. The woman behind the desk didn't seem concerned. She nodded, said it had gone through, and I left. 2 days later, I still hadn't received the confirmation email. I figured maybe it was a delay. Universities are slow with everything. But a week passed. Then two. I tried emailing them. No reply. I called during office hours. The line just rang. I even went back in person. The same woman wasn't there. A man in a short-sleeved shirt and tie said they had a high volume of submissions and to give him more time. I let it go. I got distracted with finals, group projects, my job at the coffee shop off campus. Then, toward the end of the semester, I noticed something strange. I logged into the student portal to check my grades, and it didn't let me in. The system gave me an error, student ID not found. I thought it was a glitch. I tried again. Same error. I used a different browser. I tried on my phone. Still nothing. I called IT. They asked for my student ID. I gave it. The man on the phone paused, said he couldn't find it. He said maybe I gave the wrong number. I double-checked. It was the one on my ID card on all my emails from the school. I read it again. He said, sorry, but that student number isn't coming up. I went to campus the next day and walked straight to the registrar. The woman at the desk looked confused when I explained what was happening. She typed into her system, then tilted her head. You said your name was what again? I repeated it, slowly. She turned the screen toward me. It was blank. Where my student profile should have been, there was nothing. No record, no enrollment history. It was as if I'd never been a student. I showed her my ID, my emails. She said those things could be fake. She gave me a contact card for the Office of Student Records and said they might help. I started panicking. My friends tried to help. But when they searched me on the campus directory, I didn't come up. When they checked our class group chats, my name wasn't listed. Old texts from me were still on their phones, but they said my contact photo was gone. One of them, Jonah, joked, "It's like you don't exist." That was when I started digging. I remember the internship office. It was the last official system I had gone through. The last form I had submitted. I went back again. This time, the door was locked. A paper sign was taped to the window, closed for system maintenance. I waited outside until someone came by. A janitor unlocked the door around 6. I slipped in behind him. The lights were off. The place was deserted. I found the terminal where I had filled out the application. It was unplugged. The monitor had dust on it. I reconnected it and turned it on. It booted to a login screen. It asked for staff credentials. I didn't have any. I tried random guesses. Nothing worked. I went back out and found the janitor again. Asked if he knew who worked in that office. He said, not for months now. It's been empty. No one's worked there. I asked. He shook his head. They moved that department to the Career Center last semester. Whole third floor was shut down after the database crash. What database crash? He shrugged. Something with the student system. Wiped a bunch of files. I didn't know what to do. I walked straight to the Career Center. A counselor there listened to my story politely, but when I gave her my name, she couldn't find me either. Not even under withdrawn or dismissed students. Just gone. She gave me a number for Central Administration. I called. The same thing. We don't have a record of your enrollment. At this point, I went to the dean's office. I was desperate. I brought all my documents, my ID, even a transcript I'd saved from earlier in the year. I showed the front desk assistant everything. She looked nervous. She said she wasn't sure what she could do. Told me to leave my info, and she'd pass it on. I never heard back. My student email stopped working. My campus Wi-Fi login failed. I went to class one day, and the professor didn't recognize me. Said my name wasn't on the roster. I showed him my old assignments. He frowned and said I must be confused, that he didn't remember grading any of my work. I wasn't just forgotten. I was erased. My lease was tied to student housing. A few weeks later, I got a notice saying I was no longer eligible for residency. My student ID didn't scan at the entrance anymore. I had to sneak in through the back. I was living like a ghost on campus. I tried applying to other schools, but they asked for transcripts. I had none. The ones I had saved were suddenly flagged as invalid. I sent in appeals. No responses. Even private companies I applied to for jobs couldn't verify my degree status. One background check came back saying I had never been enrolled at any university. That summer, I went home. My parents were confused, angry. They thought I had dropped out and was lying to cover it up. They demanded proof. I had none they accepted. I tried tracking down other students who had gone through that same internship office. There were barely any online mentions of it. A few Reddit threads, old posts, nothing recent. One post caught my eye. Someone from a different university, a transfer student, said they had gone through a similar process. Applied for an internship, then had issues with enrollment records afterward. No one replied to the thread. The account was deleted. It's been over a year since then. I never got my records back. I work now at a small electronics store. Nothing to do with my major. I stopped trying to convince people. Even my old friends don't talk to me much anymore. I'm not in any graduation photos. I'm not listed in the class yearbook. There's no paper trail. I stopped existing the moment I submitted that internship form. Later, I learned that the school had migrated their student management system around that time. The new database had a syncing error that caused certain entries to be flagged as invalid and then purged. It happened during testing, before the system was fully live. Someone said the internship office was still using an outdated form that wasn't compatible with the upgrade. Submissions from there didn't register properly. When the system tried to sync them, it flagged them as duplicates or errors and deleted them permanently. It was automated. No one noticed until much later. And when they did, they covered it up. Quietly. Because to admit it would mean lawsuits, compensation, national attention. Instead, they sealed off the office, deleted mentions of it, moved things to another department, and acted like it never happened. I can't prove any of it, but I know what happened. I remember, and I write this here in case someone else remembers too. I don't remember hitting the ground. I only remember the sound of my own breathing in my ears, fast and shallow, and the dull, high-pitched ringing that came right after the crash. I opened my eyes and saw my bike on its side in the dirt, the rear wheel still spinning slowly. My palms were scraped, stinging sharply, and my left knee was already swelling. For a few seconds, I just sat there, stunned, the pain slowly catching up to what had happened. I wasn't going that fast, maybe a little faster than usual, but not recklessly. It was just past 7 in the morning. I always left my dorm at the same time to get to my chemistry lab, and I always took the same route. The campus bike path cut through the eastern edge of the science buildings and curved around the backside of a tall glass-walled building called the Polaris Center. The curve was sharp, but nothing wild. I'd taken it dozens of times. That morning, everything was normal until the bend. I leaned in just like always. The next thing I knew, I was off the path, in the dirt, lying there with my hands bleeding and my leg burning. It didn't make sense. I replayed it in my head while I slowly got back up. My backpack was half open, but nothing had spilled. I wiped my hands on my jeans and checked the bike. The front tire was warped, which explained the shake I felt just before I fell. My face felt hot, and I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears. I limped the rest of the way to class, holding the bent bike by the handlebars. My shirt stuck to my back with sweat, even though it was cool outside. I told the lab tech I slipped on a patch of gravel. That was easier than saying, I don't know what happened. It bothered me all day. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The curve wasn't new. I knew it like the back of my hand. But something was off. It felt wrong somehow, like I'd misjudged the distance or angle without realizing it. Later that day, I went back to the scene. I stood at the start of the curve and looked at it carefully. The path sloped slightly downhill, just a few degrees. The curve itself wasn't too sharp, but it forced you to lean if you were going even a little fast. Right on the outside of the bend was the building wall. Huge, all reflective glass, stretching up at least 5 stories. I stared at it for a long time. I started to walk through it slowly, imagining the route I'd taken earlier that morning. Then I did it again. I even borrowed a bike from my roommate later and rode the same section again, slower this time. I didn't crash, but I noticed something. Right before the curve, if you looked up even a little, the reflection of the bike path and the glass wall made it look like the turn was shallower than it really was. If you were going fast, your eyes naturally drifted upward to gauge the bend, and the mirrored surface threw your sense of direction off by just enough. It was subtle, but the more I looked, the more I was sure. The next day, I went to the campus clinic for my knee, and while waiting, I overheard 2 students talking about someone else who had crashed in the same spot a week earlier. A girl, sophomore, broke her wrist. They said it happened on the curve near Polaris. That made 3 people in less than a year that I personally knew had fallen there. I went online that night and searched through the campus forum and Reddit threads. Buried in different posts, I found at least 6 other mentions of accidents near the same bend, all with similar descriptions. Lost control on the curve, hit the dirt, sometimes injured, always confused afterward. There was a pattern, and no one seemed to be connecting it. The next week, I started going back to that spot every day. Not just riding, but watching. I'd sit on a bench just before the curve and pretend to be reading or on my phone. Most riders passed through fine, but a lot of them slowed down more than seemed necessary. I saw several who swerved slightly at the midpoint of the curve. Tiny corrections, nothing major, but I could tell they were reacting to something they saw or felt. Then it happened again. It was a Wednesday. A guy on a red bike came around the bend a little too fast. I could tell from the way his shoulders tensed and his eyes flicked upward just before the turn. He hit the brakes halfway through, overcorrected, and skidded out onto the dirt shoulder. He didn't fall hard, but he scraped his elbow and was limping a little as he got up. I helped him. He looked shaken, confused, like I had felt. He said it was his own fault, probably just riding too fast. I didn't say anything. I just watched him go. Over the next 2 weeks, I saw 2 more crashes, both minor. All of them happened at the exact same spot, within a few feet of each other. I started documenting everything. I took photos of the curve from different angles, especially from a rider's perspective. I shot videos of people riding through it, and I made note of how many slowed down, swerved, or nearly lost control. I even used a small angle gauge to measure the slope, and with a cheap laser measurer, I mapped the curvature of the path. It wasn't just a mirror effect. It was the combination of the slope, the turn, and the reflective wall. A perfect storm of poor design. The incline leading into the turn sped people up slightly, just enough that if they weren't braking in advance, they'd be going faster than they realized. The curve required a bit of leaning, which naturally led riders to look ahead to judge how much to turn. That's when the mirrored wall came into play. The path reflected in the glass was skewed. It made the curve appear shallower, longer, more gentle than it was. So if someone judged the angle based on that reflection, they'd turn too late or not sharply enough, and they'd drift wide. If you were lucky, you just wobble or swerve. If not, you'd hit the dirt or even the metal rail beyond the shoulder. Once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I sent an email to the campus facilities office, including my photos and data. I didn't expect much, but they actually responded. The reply was polite and formal. They said they would look into it and review the existing safety measures. That was it. I followed up a week later. No answer. So I took a different approach. I wrote up a full report. Photos, measurements, crash reports from student forums, screenshots, timestamps, and my own analysis. I included suggestions for changes. Repainting the path with visible curve markers, placing a convex mirror at the start of the turn, adding a textured surface to force riders to slow down before entering. I printed copies and hand-delivered one to the office of the campus risk management director. A week later, they contacted me. They told me that there had been multiple complaints over the past 3 years, but that no formal investigation had been conducted because none of the injuries were serious enough to trigger a review under their internal safety threshold. My report, they admitted, was the most complete documentation they had received on the issue. They asked if I would be willing to meet with the campus safety engineer. I agreed. The meeting was held in a small office across from the gym. I met with a man named Gary, a quiet, middle-aged guy with a notepad and tired eyes. He had read my report. He asked me questions about my own crash, about what I'd seen, about my measurements. I showed him everything. He didn't say much, just nodded a lot and took notes. 3 weeks after that, the campus installed a convex mirror at the entrance to the curve. The next month, they added yellow chevrons on the pavement and a slow, sharp turn-ahead sign mounted on a low post just before the incline began. I kept watching the path for the rest of the semester. Accidents dropped off to 0. People still rode fast sometimes, but now the signs and markings helped. The mirror especially. It broke the illusion from the glass wall and gave riders a better sense of the real path ahead. No one ever gave me credit for the changes. No announcements. No thank you notes. I didn't care. Sometimes I'd still ride the path just to see it. The curve was the same, but now it didn't catch people off guard. It didn't hurt anyone anymore. That was enough. Looking back, what scared me most wasn't the crash. It was how easy it had been for a small, overlooked design flaw to quietly hurt so many people, over and over, and how long it took for anyone to notice. Not because it was invisible, but because no one bothered to look closely. Everyone just blamed themselves. Like I did it first, but it wasn't our fault. It was just a curve, just a mirror, just a slope. Put together the wrong way, they became a trap. And no one fixed it until someone finally paid attention. When I first got the acceptance letter to the university, I felt like I had finally done something right. Everything had been building up to that moment. My grades, my sleepless nights, my part-time jobs, the scholarships I applied to, and then came the news. I'd be offered a place in the scholarship building. It was supposed to be an honor, a brand new building funded by some rich donor for students like me, high achievers with financial need. They said it was quiet, clean, and secure. Only a short walk from the science and engineering halls. I remember thinking how lucky I was. It was a modern structure too, all steel and glass and concrete, sharp edges and white walls. I moved in late August. The heat outside was brutal, but the air conditioning inside was cold and dry. The lobby smelled like new paint and floor polish. There was a weird sense of order to it all. No music, no posters, no signs of life, really, just neatness. Everything was too clean. It reminded me of a hospital, especially the lighting, fluorescent and constant. Each floor had 12 units, and I was in 6C. My room had a desk, a bed, and a narrow window that barely opened. It faced the opposite wing of the building, so all I saw were more windows. The walls were white, the carpet gray. There was no overhead light, just the dull yellow glow of a desk lamp. When I first moved in, it seemed fine. Standard dorm stuff. Maybe a little plain. There were no RA meetings, no welcome mixers. We didn't get any guidance about the building. No tours. The welcome email just had a digital key link and a note about noise restrictions. I didn't think much of it at first. Everyone here was on scholarship. We were all serious students, I figured. Maybe that was why it was so quiet. But after the first few weeks, I started noticing things. Not big things, just small patterns. People kept to themselves. Doors stayed closed. I barely saw anyone in the hallways. Even the laundry room or the elevators, it felt empty. And when I did run into someone, they'd look at me like I wasn't supposed to be there. A glance that lasted a second too long. Not hostile, but not normal either. Then there were the nights. At first, I thought I was just adjusting. A new environment, new routines. But I wasn't sleeping. I'd lie in bed for hours, my heart pounding, my body buzzing like I'd had caffeine, even if I hadn't. There was no noise, none. That was part of the problem. It was too quiet. No traffic outside. No voices from the halls. Not even the hum of the fridge. Just the silence and the buzz in my own head. Some nights I'd fall asleep for maybe an hour, then wake up again for no reason. I'd feel alert, like I was being watched. But there was nothing. Just the glowing green numbers of the digital clock on my desk. I started using sleep apps, noise machines, melatonin. Nothing worked. The insomnia got worse. By October, I was running on maybe 3 hours of broken sleep a night. I started skipping morning classes, drifting off in lectures. I couldn't focus. My thoughts felt like they were unraveling. I'd stare at a paragraph in a textbook for an hour and retain none of it. I started drinking more coffee just to keep my head up, and the headaches, tight, sharp ones behind my eyes. Constant pressure. I wasn't the only one. I saw in other people too. Dark circles, slouch posture. People stopped making eye contact. One girl on my floor, I don't even know her name, had a breakdown in the stairwell one night. I heard her through the door, crying, talking to herself. I almost went out to check on her, but something held me back. It didn't feel safe. One evening in late October, I ran into a guy in the elevator, tall, skinny, sunken eyes. I remembered seeing him around orientation. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 2 months. He didn't say anything, but he tapped the same floor as me, 6. When the doors opened, he just stood there for a second, then walked out slowly. His shoulders hunched. As the doors closed, I saw him turn around and stare at the elevator like he was expecting something. That was the last time I saw him. A week later, his room was empty. I started looking things up. The building's name was plastered all over university materials. The Vanderhall Scholarship Residence. Donated by Leonard Vanderhall, a philanthropist and former pharmaceutical executive. Big supporter of education, apparently. But the more I dug, the more confused I got. There was almost nothing about the building before 2 years ago, and I couldn't find any record of it being constructed on public records before that time. No planning permits, no build history, just a sudden appearance. Then I found something buried in the archives of a university newspaper. An article from 10 years ago about a research center on the same plot of land. It had been closed after an ethics review. No details in the article, just that it had been associated with advanced studies on cognitive endurance and sleep modulation. The building had been sealed off for years. Then, 5 years later, suddenly rebranded and renovated into a dorm. I found old satellite images. The structure was the same. They just redone the exterior. Different windows, added balconies, but the skeleton was identical. That's when I realized the building wasn't built for students. It was a lab, a testing facility. I started noticing things inside the room too. The walls didn't seem like normal drywall. They had a faint texture, like painted metal. I found tiny holes near the ceiling corners, like ventilation, but too small. The desk lamp didn't have a bulb I could replace. The mattress was dense and hard, like something in a hospital. I peeled back the bed frame once and found wires running underneath it, going into the wall. I stopped sleeping entirely in November. Maybe 1 hour here or there. My mind felt shredded. I was hallucinating sometimes, hearing footsteps behind me, catching glimpses of movement in mirrors. But nothing was ever there. I was failing 2 classes. I couldn't write papers anymore. I couldn't think. And still, I couldn't bring myself to leave. Part of me was convinced I had to stay, that if I left, I'd lose my scholarship. I told myself I'd be fine. That was all in my head. But another part of me knew something was wrong with the building itself. One night, I ripped open the back panel of the desk. Inside, behind the drawers, there were small black boxes connected by wires, some kind of sensors, I think. I followed them along the baseboard to a wall panel near the bathroom. I tried to pry it open with a screwdriver. It wouldn't budge. A few days later, I got a warning email from the housing office. Tampering with university property is a violation of your agreement. Further incidents may affect your scholarship status. No signature, no contact number, just that. That's when I started writing everything down. Every hour I was awake, every sound, every time I felt the buzzing behind my eyes. I kept a log of when I tried to sleep, when I woke up. I noted how the room temperature never changed, how the light from the hallway never flickered, how the Wi-Fi was always on, full signal, even during storms when the rest of campus had outages. I reached out to a professor in neuroscience I'd taken a class with. I emailed him vaguely, asking about long-term effects of sleep deprivation. He replied with a paper and a short note. Chronic lack of REM sleep leads to cognitive fragmentation, disassociation, memory failure. Extreme cases may experience loss of self-awareness. I wondered if that was the goal. I watched the residents more closely. Some were still trying to act normal, going to class, studying in the lounge, but their eyes gave them away. Red, sunken, blinking too often. Some people had stopped going out altogether. Food delivery bags piled up outside their doors. A few units went dark completely. No light, no sound, no movement. Finals week came. I failed 2 exams outright. My hands shook too much to write properly. My thoughts wouldn't form sentences. I stopped calling my family. I didn't want them to hear what I sounded like. The worst night was in December. I woke up. Not sure when, but everything was vibrating. Not the room, but my body. Like every nerve ending was pulsing at a different frequency. I sat up, drenched in sweat. I saw something. No, someone standing at the foot of the bed. Just for a second, then gone. I told myself it was a hallucination, but it left a smell behind, like ozone and plastic. The next morning, I packed a bag and left. Just walked out. I didn't even check out. I moved into an off-campus apartment I couldn't afford. My grades stayed low that semester. I had to appeal to keep my scholarship, but I never went back to that building. Over the next few months, I started sleeping again. Slowly, for hours, then 5. The headaches faded. The buzzing behind my eyes stopped. I still struggled with focus, but my thoughts started making sense again. I'd find myself staring at walls, remembering the feeling of that room. That silence. I never got an explanation. The university still promotes the building in brochures, still calls it a privilege, a place for elite minds. They don't talk about the failure rate among the residents, or how many drop out, or disappear, but know what it was. It wasn't housing. It was a continuation of that old research, a place to push students to the edge without telling them, to see what the brain does without rest. How long it lasted? It was always open. That's what caught my attention in the first place. I found it by accident near the end of my second semester, tucked away in the basement of the old sciences building. The building was barely used anymore since most of the classes had been moved to newer, glass-wall blocks on the other side of campus. But I'd started wandering one evening after dinner, trying to find a quiet place to cram before my physiology exam. Every other place on campus was full of noise, people whispering, typing, the constant hum of vending machines. Even the library felt too busy. I wanted silence. I wanted something that didn't remind me of how behind I was. I don't even remember what made me push that door. It was unmarked, just a plain door at the end of a cold corridor. It wasn't locked, which was surprising. The room inside was big, bigger than I expected, long rectangular shape, with rows of plain wooden desks and metal chairs. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. The walls were off-white, slightly yellowed, and had no posters or windows. It didn't smell like anything. Not dusty, not musty. Just clean, blank. There were no other students. No staff. Nothing to suggest the room was even used anymore. But the overhead lights were on, and there was a working clock on the far wall. That first night, I sat there for 3 hours. I finished 2 chapters. I thought it was perfect, so I came back the next day, and the next. Then every evening after that. I started calling at the study lab, though I never found any signs or room numbers that called it that. I never saw anyone else in there. I didn't care. It became my secret place. My mind felt sharp when I was inside. I didn't fidget as much. There was nothing to distract me. The chairs weren't that comfortable, and the lighting was a little too bright, but I figured that was a good thing. It kept me alert. After a few weeks, I realized I'd stopped studying anywhere else. Even when I had group projects or tutorials, I'd make excuses to leave early and head to the study lab. I'd pack a bottle of water and a granola bar and sit there until past midnight sometimes. I liked how I didn't have to think about anything else in that room. Just read, write, highlight. I thought it was helping. It took a while before I noticed anything was wrong. At first, it was just little things. I couldn't remember whether I had eaten lunch. I'd wake up unsure if I'd set my alarm or not. Once I poured coffee into a bowl instead of a mug. Normal mistakes, I told myself. Stress-related. Then I realized I couldn't remember certain lectures. Whole class is gone. I had a lab partner who asked me about something we discussed, and I couldn't recall even being there. I checked my attendance. I had been there. Notes were in my folder, written in my own handwriting. But I had no memory of sitting through that class. I blamed sleep at first. Maybe I was just tired. I tried cutting back on late nights. I stayed out of the study lab for 2 days and worked in the dorm common area instead. But I couldn't focus. I kept glancing around at people. The noise irritated me. I ended up back in the basement on day 3. And that's when it got worse. One night, I stayed in the lab for over 5 hours. I remember checking the time when I arrived, just past 7 p.m. I had my water bottle, my notes, my textbook. I sat in my usual seat in the second row from the front. When I next looked up, the clock on the wall said 1:15 a.m. My water bottle was empty. My highlighter was uncapped and dried out. My hands ached like I'd been writing for hours, but I couldn't remember a single thing I'd read. I felt dizzy when I stood up. My legs were stiff. I walked back to my dorm, hands shaking, and fell asleep fully dressed. When I woke up at noon the next day, I had no recollection of what I'd studied. I opened my notebook. The pages were full of scribbled words, many of them repeated or unfinished. Some of it was gibberish. I didn't remember writing any of it. I tried to stop going, but I couldn't focus anywhere else. My brain felt foggy outside of that room. I'd open a book in the library and forget what page I was on. I'd reread the same paragraph over and over again. But in the study lab, the fog cleared. It was like I was suspended in that space, not thinking about time or hunger or anything except the next sentence, the next word. I felt productive even when I didn't remember what I'd done. Eventually, I started asking around. I didn't mention the memory problems. Just asked if anyone else used the lab in the old sciences building. Most people didn't know what I was talking about. A few had heard about it, but had never gone. One guy said he tried it once and left after 10 minutes because it made his head hurt. Said the lights were too harsh and the room felt off. I pressed, but he just shrugged. Out of curiosity, I asked the campus admin desk about the room. They looked confused and pulled up a floor plan. The room wasn't listed. The hallway was. The storerooms nearby were. But the study lab itself wasn't labeled at all. I told myself that wasn't weird. Maybe the records were out of date. Maybe it was just a leftover classroom no one used anymore. But it bothered me. Then I noticed something else. Grades. I'd always been average. Not top of the class, but not failing either. Solid middle. But after a few weeks of using the lab, my test scores started dropping. At first, I thought it was just a bad exam. It happened again and again. I handed in an essay and got a 42. The professor's notes said the structure didn't make sense and large parts were missing or repeated. I checked the file on my laptop. It looked fine to me, but when I opened it again an hour later, half the text had changed. Whole paragraphs were gone. A page had been duplicated. I couldn't explain it. I tried to remember writing the essay in the first place, but the memory was foggy. I had a vague sense of being in the study lab, working late, but not much else. No clear start, no clear finish. I checked my recent files. There were multiple versions, all with odd timestamps, some just a few minutes apart. One was completely blank except for my name at the top. It scared me. I decided to time myself during session. I brought a stopwatch and my phone and wrote down the time I entered, 5:13 p.m. I told myself I'd leave after exactly 2 hours. I didn't open my books right away. Just sat and watched the clock on my phone and the one on the wall. They stayed in sync for a while. Then the wall clock jumped. One moment it said 5:48. Then suddenly it was 7:26. My phone still said 5:50. I blinked. I looked away, then back. The wall clock now read 7:41. I stood up, heart pounding. My phone time was frozen at 5:50, even though the second hand was ticking. I left immediately. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I tried explaining what happened to a classmate I trusted. I didn't mention the clock, just said I felt weird in the lab and had memory problems. He gave me a strange look and said something about burnout. I let the conversation drop. A few days later, I started searching through old student forums and threads from previous years. I found a few mentions of the lab. Nothing recent. Just vague comments like too bright or creepy but useful. One post from a few years back stood out. It was short. Just said, stayed in that room for 6 hours. Came out and forgot my own birthday. Never going back. That same user had posted frequently before, usually about study tips and exam stress. After that post, nothing. No more activity. I looked up their name. Couldn't find any graduation record. It became a pattern. Every person who mentioned the lab had gaps in their posting history. Some stopped updating their profiles entirely. I checked the alumni lists. A few names were missing. I was getting obsessed. I started making a spreadsheet of names, dates, mentions of the study lab, final grades if I could find them. Most of them had sharp declines in academic performance within weeks of mentioning the lab. Several had reportedly dropped out. No one ever said why. I didn't go back to the lab again, but it kept pulling at me. I dreamed about it. Long blank hallways, buzzing lights, notebooks filled with ink, but no meaning. I started keeping a detailed log of everything I did. Wake times, meals, lectures, assignments. I checked it constantly. I was terrified I'd forget something important. Then I made a mistake. I was in the sciences building for a tutorial and realized I'd left my calculator behind. I ran back to check, and for some reason, I went down the hallway. The lab door was ajar, just a few inches. I should have walked away, but I pushed it open. The lights were off. First time I'd ever seen them off. I stepped inside and flicked the switch. Buzz. That same cold white light. The same smell of nothing. The same rows of desks and chairs. My hand shook. I turned around to leave, and that's when I noticed the mirror. It was mounted high on the back wall, like something from a supermarket security system. I had never seen it before. It reflected the entire room. I looked up and froze. There was something strange about the angles. The room looked longer in the mirror. More desks. Slight warping, like the mirror wasn't flat. I stepped to the side. My reflection lagged behind a fraction of a second. I left in a hurry. Later that week, I filed a report to Student Services. I listed everything: the memory issues, the time gaps, the academic decline, the mirror, the wall clock discrepancies. I expected them to dismiss it. They didn't. A week later, the hallway was sealed off. Temporary construction signs were posted. A maintenance notice went out saying I transferred into the university halfway through the year. It wasn't my first choice, but my original plan didn't work out, and I ended up here out of necessity. Still, I figured I'd make the best of it. I was majoring in architectural engineering, and I liked that the campus was older. Some of the buildings had that old institutional charm: solid stone, narrow windows, oddly shaped stairwells. There was history here. I could feel it when I walked through the older halls. When I got my class schedule, I noticed something strange. My materials design lab was listed as being in room B081. I looked over the building maps online and couldn't find that room anywhere. It skipped from B060 to B090. I figured maybe it was a mistake or a new wing they hadn't updated yet. I emailed the department, but all they said was, yes, B081 is correct. The day of the class, I made my way to the engineering building. The elevators didn't have a button labeled for the basement, only floors 1 through 6. I assumed I had to take the stairs, so I went down to the ground floor and looked for a stairwell. The main one only went up, so I wandered until I found a less used hallway with older signs. There was a plain metal door with a sign that read, "Maintenance" in lower letters. I tried the handle. It was unlocked. The stairwell was narrow, poorly lit, and colder than the rest of the building. The walls were unfinished concrete. Pipes ran along the ceiling, and the lights flickered slightly. It didn't look like anywhere students were supposed to be, but my class was supposedly down here. I counted the steps, trying to estimate how far below ground I was going. At the bottom, the corridor stretched in both directions, lined with heavy doors. Some were labeled, some weren't. The air smelled faintly of mold and dust. The overhead lights buzzed, and my footsteps echoed too loudly. I felt like I was in a part of the building no one had used in years. I found B081 at the very end of the hall. The door was the same dull metal, and the label looked like it had been added recently. The room inside was big, but empty, with concrete walls, a few tables, and metal shelves along the walls. There were no windows. The air felt dry, like it hadn't moved in a long time. The lighting was dimmer than upstairs, slightly yellow. A few other students were already inside. I didn't know any of them. They were all quiet, seated far apart. I sat down at a table near the back. No one talked. There was no professor yet. We waited in silence until a tall man in a black jacket came in. He didn't introduce himself. He just started writing on the board. It took me a few minutes to realize this wasn't the same professor listed in the syllabus. I thought maybe there had been a change. I didn't say anything. No one else seemed bothered. The class itself was normal enough. Lectures, assigned readings, occasional lab work. The content was dry but manageable. But it was the room that got to me. Every time I was in there, I felt strange. The walls seemed to press in, the silence felt heavy, and the air always had that stale, dead quality. The fluorescent lights buzzed just loud enough to be irritating. I began to notice things. People dropped out, not all at once, just little by little. The first week we had about 15 people, then 12, then 9. I couldn't tell you when some of them stopped coming. I just realized one day that they weren't there anymore. Nobody asked about them. I asked another student once, a guy named Eric who sat near me, if he knew what happened to one of the missing students. He just said, probably dropped the class without looking up. That was it. We never spoke again. The professor never addressed it. He just continued with the lessons like nothing had changed. He never took attendance. He never gave us assignments with due dates. Everything was vague. It wasn't until the 4th week that I noticed we weren't using any lab equipment. The room had shelves with old parts, wires, tools, but we never touched them. Everything was theoretical. The syllabus said we were supposed to be doing hands-on projects, but we never did. I went to the department office to ask if the lab work would be rescheduled. They looked confused when I told them the room number. One of the staff members told me they didn't use the basement labs anymore, that they were closed for renovations years ago. I said I had class in B081 twice a week. She just frowned and said, "That room shouldn't be in use." I asked if I could speak to the head of the department. She said he wasn't available and handed me a printed list of approved classroom locations. B081 wasn't listed. I tried bringing it up to another professor, one I trusted more. He looked uncomfortable, told me to focus on my core classes, and said that sometimes rooms get used temporarily during construction. But there wasn't any construction. One day after class, I stayed behind after everyone else left. I wanted to look through the shelves, see if any of the equipment worked. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust. Most of the tools were old, rusted, or broken. Some things were sealed in boxes labeled with dates from over 20 years ago. There were no computers, no modern devices, nothing connected. It was like the room had been frozen in time. I pulled open a drawer in one of the cabinets and found a stack of old student ID cards. They were faded from years back, and none of the names were familiar. Some of the pictures were scratched out. I took one with me. Later that night, I searched the name online. Nothing came up, not even an alumni listing. I tried another name. Still nothing. It was like they had never existed. I kept looking. I dug through archived course listings, yearbooks, department newsletters. Some names appeared once, maybe in an old PDF, then nothing. No graduation records, no social media. Just names that disappeared. I stopped going to class after that. I told myself I was dropping it. I sent an email to the registrar asking to withdraw. They replied, saying I wasn't enrolled in any course with that code. I sent a screenshot of my schedule, showing the room and time. They said it must be an error and that I should come in to correct it. I showed up in person the next day. The woman at the desk looked up my student record. She said there was no course listed at that time. I asked about the professor. She asked me to spell his name. I realized I didn't know it. He never told us. I stopped by the building that day just to see. The stairwell door was locked now. No sign, no tape, just a padlock and a blank metal plate where the sign had been. I went to the 6th floor and asked the janitor if the basement was closed. He looked at me for a second, then said, "That place hasn't been open in years. They sealed it after the flood." Flood? I asked him what he meant. He just shrugged and said it was a long time ago, maybe before my time. Said something about a burst pipe, mold issues, something like that. Said it was condemned. I left campus and didn't come back for 2 days. When I returned, I tried finding any of the students who had been in the class. Their names weren't in the directory anymore. Not even Eric. I asked around, described them to others. No one remembered them. I went to the university archives, deep in the library basement. I looked for any mention of B081. Nothing. I found blueprints of building. The basement only had a boiler room and a few storage spaces. No classrooms. I printed copies of the old ID cards, the room number, and my schedule. I brought it to the campus security office. They said it wasn't a matter for them and referred me back to administration. I gave up. That night, I had dreams about the stairwell. Long, narrow, stretching down forever. The lights buzzed. The air felt heavy. I woke up sweating. I didn't tell anyone. I stopped talking about it. I took other classes. I passed my courses. I graduated, but I never figured out what that room was or who those people were. I still have the ID card. It sits in the back of a drawer, scratched and faded. Sometimes I take it out and look at it, just to remind myself it really happened. The thing is, I don't think there was anything supernatural about it. There were no ghosts, no whispers in the dark, just silence, dust, and people that went missing. People no one remembered. I think it was something human. A mistake maybe, or a choice. A forgotten space in a forgotten part of the system too big to care. An unofficial class for unofficial students. I keep thinking about what might have happened if I stayed. What would have happened if I kept going to that room? Week after week, watching the class get smaller, the shelves get dustier, the lights get dimmer. Maybe one day I would have been the last one there. And maybe no one would have remembered me either. When I moved into my dorm room at the start of the fall semester, I didn't think anything was off. The building was old, the kind with square hallways that all looked the same, windows that didn't fully close, and carpets that smelled like boiled dust. It was called Elridge Hall, one of the older dorms on campus, with those wide wooden doors and tarnished brass numbers nailed into the center of each. My room was 3C, 3rd floor, last one at the end of the hallway. My roommate's name was Matt. I remember that because he was already there when I moved in, lying on his back on the bottom bunk with headphones on and his shoes kicked off under the desk. He gave me a nod when I walked in, didn't say much, and kept to himself. That suited me fine. I wasn't looking for a best friend, just someone who wouldn't mess with my stuff and who kept their side of the room clean. At first, we barely crossed paths. He went to early classes, I had late ones. He went to the gym or library at night. I stayed in and scrolled through my phone or did coursework. But he was there. I heard him. I'd wake up and his side of the room would be occupied, his backpack slouched against the wall, his sneakers under the bed, sometimes his laptop still open on the desk with some coding stuff on the screen. He wasn't the messy type, which I appreciated. He made his bed. He didn't eat in the room. He even wiped the desk down with those little alcohol wipes. We never talked much, but that was fine. There was nothing weird about it. He was just a quiet guy. Then he wasn't there anymore. It happened in October. I remember because midterms had just ended and I'd gone home for a long weekend. When I came back Sunday night, the room was unusually quiet, like no one had been inside for a while. His bed was made, but his laptop was gone, his chargers too, and his jacket wasn't hanging on the back of the chair like it usually was. At first, I figured he went home too, but then Monday passed and I didn't see him. Tuesday, nothing. Wednesday, I checked with one of the guys down the hall, just casually asked if he'd seen Matt around. He just shrugged, said he didn't know him. That's when I started to feel something was off. Not in a spooky, horror movie way, just this dull, sort of wrong, like when you know you're forgetting something important. I checked the student directory. He wasn't listed anymore. I checked the class roster for one of the general ed classes I thought he was taking, Biology 101 or something like that. His name wasn't there either. By the end of the week, I was sleeping in a room that had a perfectly made bed on one side that no one touched, a chair no one sat in, a drawer that still had socks in it, but no phone chargers, no notebooks, no ID badge. It felt like he'd been erased, but halfway through the job, like someone started deleting him, but stopped before finishing. I emailed housing, just said my roommate hadn't been around, and I didn't know if he'd officially moved out. No reply. I tried again a few days later. Nothing. I even went to the housing office in person. The girl at the desk looked up the room number, typed a few things, and said according to their system, there was no one assigned to room 3C except me. I didn't argue. I just said thanks and left. She looked confused too, like something didn't quite add up, but she didn't push it. That night, I searched my email for the housing confirmation, the one they sent in August that had both our names on it. I found it. It had only my name. I looked at my original packing list, a scribbled notebook page where I'd written things like towels, toothpaste, mini fridge, talk to roommate read, microwave. I remember writing that after exchanging a few messages with Matt about who would bring what. Those messages were gone. The whole chat history was blank. It just showed my message. Hey, I'm your new roommate for 3C. Looking forward to moving in. Sent. No reply. I remember getting a reply. I know he replied. Said something like, cool, I'll bring the fridge. You won't bring a fan. But it wasn't there. Nothing was. I told myself I was imagining it. Maybe I was getting confused. Maybe the housing system had changed. I tried to just move on, but I kept waking up at night, staring at that side of the room. The bed looked so undisturbed, like it was pretending to be used. I started keeping notes. I don't know why. It felt like I was trying to hold on to reality. I wrote down the dates when I last saw him. What he looked like, what he wore, details, gray hoodie, short dark hair, thin wrists, chipped nail on his left thumb. Small things. I wrote down his schedule, or at least what I thought it had been. Morning class, gym at night, coding projects. I even went back to the computer lab to see if he ever logged in there. Nothing. His net ID didn't exist, but I kept remembering him. One night, I was walking back from a late class and past one of the other dorm buildings. There were flyers on the wall, the usual stuff, club meetings, tutoring services, missing bike, someone selling couch. One of them caught my eye. A missing student. I only glanced at it, but something about the name stuck with me. When I got back to my room, I looked it up. The student had disappeared 3 years ago. Her name was Hannah Lynn. Last seen in October. Same dorm. Same room. 3C. My stomach dropped. I searched more. There was another student 2 years before that. Then another. Not every year, but almost. Always room 3C. Some cases were labeled missing persons. Others were just quiet absences, students who dropped out mid-semester without notice. No foul play suspected. Just gone. I started to lose sleep. I wasn't afraid of anything supernatural. I didn't think there were ghosts or curses, but something was happening. I checked Reddit. I found a thread from 5 years ago. A junior had posted a rant about being reassigned to a different dorm last minute. Said he was supposed to be in Elridge 3C, but housing told him the room was temporarily unavailable. He said it wasn't under construction or anything, just off limits. A few comments speculated about mold or bed bugs. One person mentioned a rumor about a guy who went missing there. The thread died out after that. I looked up the building's history. Elridge Hall had been built in the 1960s, renovated in the early 2000s. There were no major incidents listed online. No news stories. Nothing that stood out. But I kept digging. Eventually, I went to the library archives. They had old university papers on microfilm. I went year by year, checking the fall issues. That's when I found it. A short article from 1997, buried between a student senate meeting summary and a write-up about a pumpkin carving contest. A student named Greg Alton was reported missing. He was last seen by his roommate, who told police Greg left the dorm one night and never came back. No fight. No indication of trouble. Just gone. It said he lived in Elridge 3C. The roommate's name wasn't listed, but the article said the room was sealed for several days during the investigation. No one found anything. That was the earliest mention I could find. 1997. Almost 30 years ago. I sat there for a long time after that, thinking it wasn't ghosts. It wasn't a curse. I was sure of that. It was something else. Something real. A pattern. A student vanishes every few years. Quietly. No signs of struggle. Nothing violent. Just absence. And no one connects the dots because there's nothing to connect. No bloodius. No blood. Just gaps. And no one ever talks about it. No professors mention it. No administrators bring it up. Even the housing office didn't seem to know or didn't want to. So I made a plan. I waited until the building emptied out for Thanksgiving break. Everyone was gone. I stayed behind. Said I couldn't afford the flight home. I stayed in the room. Alone. I searched every inch of that place. I pulled the drawers out completely. I unscrewed the metal plates under the bunk bed. I opened the light switch panel. I measured the walls. One of them was thicker than the others. The one between 3C and 3D. Almost half a foot thicker. I knocked on it. It sounded solid, but not uniform. I borrowed a stud finder from a friend in engineering. He didn't ask questions. I brought it back to the room and started scanning. There was a gap. Not a large one. Maybe 3 feet wide. A hollow section inside the wall. No vents. No access panels. Nothing to indicate a crawl space. I marked the spot and stared at it for hours. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't tear the wall open without getting expelled. I thought about drilling a hole. I thought about leaving alone. In the end, I borrowed a small inspection camera, the kind they use for pipes. It had a flexible cable and a little LED light at the tip. I drilled a hole. It took time. I did it slow, behind the desk, where it wouldn't be noticed. The bit punched through into empty space. I fed the camera in, inch by inch. Inside was a narrow cavity, dust-covered, wires running along one side, and something else. A box, metal, bolted to the floor inside the wall. I couldn't reach it. The camera couldn't see inside, but I recorded everything. I reported it anonymously to campus security. Said there might be a maintenance issue in Elridge Hall. They came 2 days later. I pretended not to notice. They didn't knock on my door. But the next week, 3C was marked under maintenance on the housing portal. Then it was removed entirely. I was reassigned to another dorm by December. They didn't give me a reason. I moved out. I took everything. I didn't leave a trace. But I kept the video. I kept the notes. I never found out what happened to Mac or Greg. I wasn't supposed to end up at that college. It wasn't even in my top 3. I had applied mostly because it was close to home and the application fee was waived. When I didn't get into my first choices, I told myself it didn't matter. College is college. But I had this quiet feeling in the back of my mind like something was off even before I got there. I ignored it. I had to. The campus looked normal at first. Big, red brick buildings, a clock tower, trees lining every sidewalk. The kind of place you'd see on a college brochure or recruitment ad. Everyone smiled during orientation. They gave us maps and free pens and water bottles with the school logo. It felt welcoming, but not warm. Like the people here had practiced being friendly, not like they were friendly by nature. My dorm was on the north end of campus, in a building called Miller Hall. It was 4 stories tall and shaped like a box. My room was on the 3rd floor, facing the back lot. There wasn't much of a view, just a chain-link fence and the edge of a maintenance shed. My roommate, Connor, was already moved in when I arrived. He was quiet, clean, and barely around, which suited me just fine. We got along by not talking much. Classes started smoothly. I kept my head down, went to lectures, took notes, did what I had to do. It was about 2 weeks and when I first heard about the fall incident. That's what people called it, just that, the fall incident. I overheard it in the dining hall. A couple of juniors were talking behind me, and I wasn't even listening closely until I caught the words stairwell and freshman in the same sentence. My ears perked up. They mentioned someone who'd fallen down a stairwell last fall. No one said if the student had died or not, just that it was bad, that it was just like the others. I wanted to turn around and ask, but I didn't. I figured I could Google it later. I did, but nothing came up. No news articles. No rede de triais. Not even campus news. That bothered me more than anything. Colleges hide stuff, I get it, but if someone had really fallen and gotten seriously hurt, maybe even died, there would have been something, right? I try not to think about it, until it happened again. It was a Friday night in late September. I just gotten back from the library and was heading up to my room when I saw the tape. Yellow police tape. It was stretched across the 3rd floor hallway near the elevators. A campus security guard stood nearby, arms crossed, face blank. I had to take the stairs and use the other end of the building to get around. When I reached my door, there were students gathered near the hall's midpoint, whispering. No one knew anything for sure, but a few said someone had fallen down the stairwell on the south side. That was when I got chills. Same exact thing I'd overheard earlier. Another fall, another freshman. Over the next few days, rumors spread. People said the student had died. Some said he was in critical condition. Others said he just broke his legs. No one knew his name, or at least no one said it. The school put out an email saying there had been a medical emergency in Miller Hall, but that no students are currently at risk. That was all. That's when I started paying attention. I noticed how people didn't talk about it openly. When I tried asking Connor about it, he just shrugged and said he didn't want to get mixed up in that stuff. I didn't understand what he meant. What stuff? I started digging. I went to the campus library and pulled out old yearbooks and campus newsletters. Most of it was boring, but I noticed something strange when I looked through the past 10 years of fall semester editions. Every year, around September or October, there was a gap in newsletters. An issue would be skipped. Sometimes two. No explanation. No notes. Just a sudden break in the printing schedule. Then it would pick back up like nothing had happened. I kept a little notebook and started tracking the incidents I could find. I'd comb the student forums, listen in the dining hall, even pretend to be on call so I could stand near conversations. Little by little, I pieced things together. Freshmen, always in the fall, always something involving falling or injuries near stairwells or walkways. Sometimes it was blamed on drinking, sometimes on stress. Once, someone was said to have gotten lost in the tunnels under the chemistry building and had to be pulled out after 2 days. Another time, someone went missing for almost a week and turned up in a supply closet, dehydrated and confused. No one ever talked about these things directly. There were whispers, glances, jokes made with nervous laughs. What started to bother me more than anything was how little anyone seemed to care. People accepted it, like it was part of college life. But it wasn't. I knew it wasn't. Not like this. I went back through campus incident reports, well, the ones that were public, and tried to map the locations. A pattern started to form. The injuries and disappearances were all on the north side of campus. Every single one. And every year, the building with the incident was either Miller Hall or the next closest one, Dawson or Lathrop. I walked the area over and over, measured distances, took pictures. I even drew a map. I didn't know what I was looking for, but something about seeing it on paper helped. There was a triangle formed by the three buildings. The stairwells where the incidents occurred were all inside that triangle. I kept thinking it meant something. Mid-October rolled around, and I was barely sleeping. I'd lie awake at night in my narrow dorm bed and listen to the creaks and thuds from above. Miller Hall had weird sounds, the kind that echoed differently depending on where you stood. You'd hear footsteps when no one was there, a knock you couldn't trace. Once, I swear I heard breathing outside the door, but when I opened it, the hallway was empty. I didn't think it was ghosts. I don't believe in that crap, but I believe something was wrong here. Then, one morning, I woke up and found my notebook missing. I never left it anywhere. I kept it under my mattress. It was just gone. I tore the room apart. Nothing. When I asked Connor if he'd seen it, he said no and gave me a weird look, like I was losing it. Maybe I was, but I wasn't imagining what happened next. 2 days later, another student fell, this time in Dawson Hall. The campus email came faster, same wording, medical emergency, no ongoing risk. But now the pattern was undeniable. That triangle I drawn, this fall was right at its center. That night, I made a decision. I was going to stay up and watch. Not in my room, in the stairwell where the first incident happened. I packed snacks, wore dark clothes, and waited until just past midnight. Then I left my room, went to the stairwell, and found a corner where I could sit and stay out of sight. The place was dimly lit and smelled faintly of mop water. Every few minutes, the light would flicker. I waited and waited for hours. Just when I was starting to nod off, I heard something. Footsteps. Slow. Uneven. I held my breath. Someone turned the corner and started up the stairs. I recognized him from orientation. His name was Josh, I think. Freshman. He looked out of it. Pale. Like he was sleepwalking. Almost. I stayed silent. He kept climbing, not looking around. When he reached the top of the stairwell, he stopped and just stood there. No movement. No sound. Just frozen. Then he took a step forward, off the edge. I lunged out and grabbed his arm before he could fall. He screamed and tried to pull away, confused and disoriented. We both collapsed to the floor. He kept mumbling something I couldn't understand. He looked around like he didn't know where he was. I helped him back to his room, and he didn't say a word the whole way. When I left, I turned and looked back down the hall. There was something on the wall near the stairwell. Tiny markings like scratches. I walked over and leaned in. There were numbers, dates, one per year, all in the fall. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just accidents. These weren't just random events. Someone was keeping track. Someone knew. I took pictures, went back to my room, and locked the door. The next morning, the scratches were gone, like they'd been scrubbed clean overnight. That same day, I got an email from the Student Affairs office. It said I was being offered an opportunity to transfer dorms to a newer building on the south side of campus. For your comfort and well-being. I hadn't asked for this. They were moving me. I didn't even have a choice. I accepted. I packed my stuff that night. As I left Miller Hall, I turned back one last time and looked at the third floor windows. Someone was standing there, not waving, not moving, just watching. It looked like Connor. I never saw him again. They said he transferred mid-semester. No warning, no bouvier, just gone. I finished out the semester in the new dorm and nothing else happened. No more falls, no more incidents. But I kept digging. Here's what I figured out. In the 1970s, there was a structural collapse on the north side of campus. A construction accident. Part of the old chemistry building caved in. 3 workers died. The report blamed faulty materials and poor oversight. But I found a lawsuit buried in the city archives. It mentioned site violations and ignored safety warnings. One of the engineers quit mid-project, claiming the design was unsafe. His report said that a flaw in the layout of the buildings created a negative flow of traffic and vision. Something about blind corners, low visibility, sensory disorientation. It was never fixed. They just built over it, covered up. Miller, Dawson, Lathrop, they were all built around that same time, using the same plans, the same flawed design. That triangle I found, it wasn't just a coincidence.